follow me when the sky starts to change. Yeah, we won't be afraid. We'll never be the same again.
You're streaming with the Fantasy Follow. Welcome, everybody, to TFF Live. Saturday night, late night. This is the Saturday Stars Show, a special edition of TFF Live tonight. A late one for you, starting just after midnight here on the East Coast. But a big week of football ahead, Week 14. Fantasy football playoffs on the way for most of you. And if not, possibly some must-win situations to make your way into your fantasy playoffs this year. So we got a lot for you tonight. Saturday Stars is all about the top matchups for this weekend. Not necessarily a start-sit, but more just a rundown of the top players to look for in tomorrow's games and also on to Monday night. And don't forget, our live chat is open all show, answering your fantasy football questions. Even if we are in other content, feel free to leave your chat. Drop us a question. We'll get to those as soon as we can. That's what we're here for, and that's what we love to do. But let's start it out tonight with some headlines for Week 14. A few different things to talk about. Actually, a lot of headlines to talk about before we get to the chats for tonight. First player to talk about here is Christian McCaffrey. McCaffrey going to be doubtful for tomorrow for Carolina. Not expected to play. Shoulder and quad injuries. Unfortunately, for those of you that have waited it out and possibly made your way into your playoffs or making that last push for your playoffs, McCaffrey, you've hoped for him at the end of the season, and not to be this week. He's now missed 9 of the last 10 games, so just very unfortunate, a rough one to deal with there for all of you who have Christian McCaffrey on your rosters, but he is doubtful, not expected to play tomorrow. Next headline we got here is Josh Jacobs for the Las Vegas Raiders. Jacobs is questionable this week. Now, he did not play last week in that win against the Jets. He was out with an ankle injury, and he was limited in 2 practices this week. It is looking a little bit more positive for Gibson than it did last week. Nonetheless, we heard from John Gruden yesterday about the running back's abilities and his possibilities to play.
Yeah, it always helps to have your feature back in action. I mean, it'll make a lot of guys like Josh Jacobs. So hopefully he's ready to go, and if he is, we'll make sure we hand him the ball. But he's a great back, and normally a great back makes great things happen, and that's what we need from our go-to guy.
All right, that was John Gruden talking about Josh Jacobs. We will see what his status ends up being for tomorrow. Next time we got to talk about here is Julio Jones. Julio Jones will be out tomorrow. He has obviously been battling injuries all season long. This will be his 4th missed game of the season now. Hamstring injury is going to take him out from this one. We will look for possibly an increase there for Calvin Ridley and also Hayden Hurst in terms of the pass game there for Atlanta. Next guy up on our list here is DeAndre Swift. DeAndre Swift is questionable for tomorrow. He did practice in full yesterday, still battling through an illness. Does look like he is more likely to play, although the Lions have already indicated that there's a good possibility that they will not have him on a full workload in his first game back. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out with Adrian Peterson and also even possibly Kerryon Johnson. All right, Daniel Jones is questionable, but it looks like he is expected to get the start tomorrow for the New York Giants. We won't have to deal with the backup situation there. that we saw last week. He is expected to play this weekend, so that is obviously a boost for your Giants receivers if you have them on your fantasy lineup over what Colt McCoy was giving them. And in Washington, unfortunate here, Antonio Gibson, he left that game last week with a toe injury, and he is going to be out this week. Obviously, that bodes well for J.D. McKissic, although I do think that Peyton Barber is going to get a lot of work here. I don't think it's going to be exclusively McKissic. I think you'll see a very similar role for him throughout the game. I think Barber will take over and get some of those snaps that Gibson won't be getting. Couple of COVID-related games missed here. David Johnson out for the Houston Texans. He will miss this game against the Bears this weekend. You would expect Duke Johnson to be the benefactor there in the backfield. And then in Miami, Myles Gaskin will be out. Same deal. And also, Gaskin is also expected to miss the game next week versus New England. So interesting to see what happens in the backfield there. DeAndre Washington is a possibility. Patrick Laird is another possibility. Some guys out there on your waiver wire as you make your way through the playoffs. Austin Hooper for the Cleveland Browns. This is a tough one if you're planning on playing Hooper. He is going to be a game-time decision. That's the Monday night game. That's what makes it a little more difficult is it does sound like there's a reasonable chance that Hooper plays, but anytime you're in this situation, if you're trying to play Hooper, have a backup plan. Just be aware of the possibility that he could miss that game. And here's yesterday Kevin Stefanski speaking on Hooper.
Like you said, we've been here before, and we'll just make sure if we don't have Hoop, we got guys that are ready to go. And if we do have them, we're full speed ahead.
All right, that is the run of our news and the headlines for the Week 14 matchups up ahead this weekend. So let's go ahead. I do see we've got some early chats here. So let's go ahead and get right into the chats. We will hold on the rest of our content until we get through all of our chats. This is what we love to do. So if you're with us, by all means, even if we're talking about something else, jump in the chat, drop us your question, and I'll remind you guys that the live chat will be open for the remainder of this show. We'll be here to answer your questions all show long. All right, the first question here is Justin Herbert. This is from Bobby Schmerda. Welcome back, Bobby. Glad to have you back on the stream. And you are asking Justin Herbert or Tom Brady at the quarterback spot. All right, so let's do this. We have our matchups, as always, our graphic on the left side of the screen, giving you the information on fantasy points to each particular position. We'll go through each of these, and we'll try to get you a reasonable amount of information just to back up my opinion. I will say I like Justin Herbert a lot in this game. I also do like Tom Brady. So let's take a look at the individual matchups. We will start with Herbert. That's a 4:25 game, home game against the Falcons. So on the left side of your screen, Atlanta allowing the most fantasy points to the quarterback position. So that does bode well for Justin Herbert in kind of a bounce-back game after a couple of down games there. On the other side of that, Tom Brady, that's a 1 o'clock game home against Minnesota. And Minnesota, as you see, currently 18th in terms of fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver spot. So right at the midway point. However, I did make note of, I put it on in my notes here. Although they're a little bit lower in terms of their matchup, so they have allowed 20 or more fantasy points to 5 different quarterbacks this season. None since week 8. However, the last 4 games, they have faced Nick Foles, Andy Dalton, Teddy Bridgewater, and Mike Glennon. So out of those 4, Bridgewater is probably the best out of those 4 players, and he has really been a streaming option in terms of fantasy purposes. So I expect Tom Brady to have a much better game than Minnesota has seen against them in the last few games. So in terms of these two guys, me personally, I think either one of them is fine at this point. I think take a look at the opponent that you're playing, try to figure out if there's any reasons why, one player helps you out more than the other one based on, who you're playing against. Perhaps you're playing against a Keenan Allen or a Mike Evans, and you want to make sure that you get those points to kind of keep yourself in a good position against your opponent. Personally, I will say I think Justin Herbert's going to be my top start when I do the starts and sits tomorrow. Let me just make sure I'm not. Yeah, that is going to be my top start tomorrow. Sneak preview on our Sunday pregame show. But Tom Brady is also on that list, and he actually is going to be number 3. So again, I think either one of these is fine. Personally, Justin Herbert to me is a fine start, but I think you probably can't go wrong with either one of these two guys. Certainly, the matchup goes to Herbert. We have seen a couple of down games, so if you're hesitant on that, then I don't think you're going wrong with Brady. I think you're okay in either one of these choices. All right, I see a couple more here from you, Bobby, so let me go ahead and jump on to the next one. And you say Nyheim Hines or DeAndre Swift? Here's another interesting one. Let's put up the fantasy points to the running back position so we can take a look at the matchups here. Let's see. First, we will start with Hines for Indianapolis. That is a 4:05 game on the road against Las Vegas. Las Vegas allowing the 4th most fantasy points to the running back spot. You see that on the left side of your screen. And then the flip side of that, DeAndre Swift. Let's see. That is also a 4 o'clock window game, 4:25 at home against Green Bay. Green Bay currently allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to the running back spot. So here's what you got. You got pretty much equal matchups. The question here is, who do we think is going to see more of the volume in this game? I'd be a little bit hesitant with both of these players. I think that Swift, this decision is going to be a lot easier for you if Detroit rules Swift out. And I don't think that's out of the question yet for this game this weekend. I think there's a possibility that Swift still does not play just as a precaution for that team. If he does play, we have already heard Darrell Bevell, the interim head coach for Detroit, speak on the fact that they're not sure they want to give Swift a full workload in his first game back. And that makes sense because he's their guy moving forward. No reason to do anything stupid here. I do think Adrian Peterson is going to get a good amount of the work here either way this week. I like the start. I like the matchup. It's the volume that you're concerned with. Hines, I think you saw Hines lose a lot of work last week to Jonathan Taylor. Nothing unexpected there. Taylor is their main guy. But I do have, let me take a look at what I put in my notes in terms of that information, because I do have Hines as one of my top starters for tomorrow. Obviously, the matchup is there. Vegas has allowed 15-plus fantasy points to 10 different running backs this year. Hines has had 17-plus 3 of the last 6 games. Now, he did only see 9 touches last week. And that was a Jonathan Taylor thing. That was against Houston. Houston was an extremely good – they've been really bad against the run. So it didn't surprise me at all there that they leaned on Taylor because he is more of the run guy, whereas Hines is more the guy that's going to get, obviously, third down type guy, pass catcher out of the backfield. The matchup is just as good against Las Vegas here. However, Las Vegas, the difference here, they are allowing the 14th most rushing yards in the league. That is the difference. They're still 4th in terms of fantasy points. Let me call up my notes from last week and contrast that to what Houston was allowing. And let me see if I got it here. Houston, let's see, should be in here somewhere. I hope. Where are they? There they are. Houston allowing the 2nd most rushing yards in the league. That was as of last week. So the difference there is 2nd to 14th. You would think, of course, Taylor got the workload there, because he was crushing on the ground. Perhaps this week that does flip a little bit, and Hines does see a little bit more of the work simply because Vegas is more in the middle in terms of rushing yards allowed. So obviously, if they are still high up in terms of fantasy points, that means they're giving up touchdowns and also potentially work to pass catchers. I like Hines. I would say with this decision, watch your reports tomorrow. It's an easy decision if Swift is out. I think if Swift is in, it gets a little bit more dicey for you. Let me see here. 4 o'clock game and 4 o'clock game. Both of them 4 o'clock games. So all the better. You have the first run of games to kind of watch your matchups, see where you're at, see if you need to take a big swing for the fences, which guy you think is going to hit for a bigger day. Personally, I think Hines is a fine start here. I'm worried about Swift's usage in this first game back. But again, keep an eye on your matchups, and that will help you as you look forward to this decision. And I do see a couple more here from you, Bobby, so I will get through these here. And, that's the very next question you put. Will Swift be starting tomorrow or have cap snaps? Yeah, I have a feeling based on what we've seen out of the reports. Actually, last week they started talking about this with the possibility that Swift would have played last week. He's probably gotten a few more practices, a little more reps at this point, but I still feel like at this point, Detroit is looking towards their future, so they're not going to do anything stupid here in terms of trying to work in Swift, on a full workload. My guess is, and again, it's just my guess, but that's my gut says that he's not going to be on a full workload tomorrow. We're going to see plenty of Adrian Peterson. I think that is a very good possibility there. So, definitely take a look at that tomorrow. I think that's the bulk of your questions there, Bobby. I think I got them all for you. I hope that helps out. Again, Bobby Shmurda, one of our regulars. Glad to have you back. Appreciate you being on with us tonight. And like I said, whoever you pick with these choices, I hope they crush it. And good luck, especially if you're in your playoffs already, Bobby. All right, the next guy up we got here is our most famous person on our live stream. It's Bill Romanowski, former NFL star Bill Romanowski. So glad to have you back, and thank you for jumping in the chat with us again this week. You ask Todd Gurley or Kareem Hunt. All right, let's analyze these two on the left side of your screen. Fantasy points to the running back position, and we will start out with Todd Gurley and take a look at his matchup. That is a 425 game on the road in Los Angeles. The Chargers currently allowing the 10th most fantasy points to the running back spot. The other side of that matchup, Kareem Hunt. And let's see, what time do they play at? I will find him here. That is, of course, that's the Monday night game. No wonder why I couldn't find him. And that's a home game against Baltimore. And Baltimore currently allowing the 25th, so the 8th fewest fantasy points to the running back spot. So right away, we see a distinct matchup advantage there for Gurley. I will say this. I do have Todd Gurley. I do not have him as one of my top 5 starts and sits tomorrow when I do the pregame show. But I did certainly take a look and see potentially putting him in there. Kareem Hunt will be on my I'm sorry, did I say sits? I meant Todd Gurley starts. Kareem Hunt, I will have among my sits tomorrow. The deal with Hunt is that I've been high on Hunt, even since Nick Chubb came back. But, his stats the past few games haven't been all that great. Again, Gurley's been battling injury as well. So this is another little bit of a tricky one. Perhaps a 4:00 game for Atlanta. If you're strictly choosing between these two, again, you have that window of that first matchup to kind of take a look, see where you're at in your matchup, and also try to get an idea what the reports are looking like, just to make sure we don't hear anything strange in terms of, Gurley's status. I think if he's a full go and they expect him to be healthy, I think he's probably the choice here, just because I think, and I'm going to hook up Hunt's play in the last few games just to add this to my response here, because I did look him up earlier and I didn't write it down in my notes. But I did note that it has a little bit of a down run there for Kareem Hunt. And let's see here. 1 second. Sometimes the computer cooperates, sometimes it doesn't. There we go. Kareem Hunt. So the last couple of games, and again, I'm looking at a half-point PPR screen here. I know a lot of you probably pay PPR, but this comes up in a half point for me. So we are looking at 104 yards in Week 10. Since then, 11 yards rushing wise, 11 yards, 62 yards, 33 yards. The last 3 games in a half-point PPR, 8.6 in Week 11 fantasy points, 6.2 in Week 12, 7.2 in Week 13. Again, those are half-point PPR numbers. So he really just has not seen the big games that we saw earlier on, even though I did expect him, in what were better matchups the past few weeks. This now being a tougher matchup, hard to say how that goes. Does that mean that Chubb has more difficult time and that Hunt gets a little bit more workload as a pass catcher? Not sure, but I think the matchup, and again, I like to talk about 4 things here. It's ability, it's volume, it's matchup, and it's game script, and look for the differences. I think both of these guys have the ability. Gurley, perhaps injury concerns, but the matchup is a big difference here. So I think if I had to lean, I'd probably lean Gurley here. But again, keep an eye on reports, make sure that there are no issues as you look forward to that matchup tomorrow. All right, I see one more here from you, Bill Romanowski, so let me get to that. And you say, big fan. Well, thank you, Bill. I'm absolutely glad to have you back on the stream. And, of course, all you regulars that are here, we appreciate you guys being on with us. And as we continue to grow this channel, we love to be able to talk with you guys instead of just talking to you guys. And I especially like being able to check back with those of you that are regulars and see how your leagues are going. So glad to have you back, Bill Romanowski. And I do see from Bobby Schmerda, you say, of course, man, thank you. And I say again, no, thank you. Thank you guys for being on the stream. All right, I see, and again, as I said before, Bill, whoever you choose, I hope they crush it. Let's get to our next chat here. And this looks like a new viewer, so I'm going to try my best and work my way through this. No, you might have been here before. Ilias, hold on, let me spell it. Giftopoulos. Ilias Giftopoulos. If I got that right, let me know. If I didn't, let me know. I try to get the names as best as I can. Sometimes it's more difficult than others, but I give it my shot. So you ask, Ilias, and if you are new, welcome to the stream. If you were here before, which I think you might have been, welcome back. You ask Montgomery or Kamara. Interesting question here. We talked about this a little bit last week. Let's put up the matchups. The Alvin Kamara thing has been a little bit questionable, as you all know. With Taysom Hill as the starter, things have not been quite what they were for Alvin Kamara. However, if we simply start with those 4 factors that I always talk about, ability, volume, matchup, game script. Clearly, Alvin Kamara, there's a reason why he's a first-round draft pick. He is clearly one of the top players in the league. So I feel like any time with one of those top players, it is difficult to sit them for a player who's been better the last 2 weeks in Montgomery. But still, this is a tricky one. So let's take a look at the matchups here, because that does make a difference. New Orleans, that's a 4:25 game on the road at Philadelphia. So let's find Philadelphia on the left side of our screen. 22nd. So that's 11th fewest fantasy points to the running back spot. And this is a really good matchup for David Montgomery. I will have David Montgomery as actually my number 2 start in tomorrow's start sit on the Sunday pregame show. And we'll put that promo up on the screen later for those of you that don't know when that's on. Make sure we get you that information. At any rate, Chicago at home against Houston. That's a 1 p.m. game. Houston, the second most fantasy points to the running back spot. Clearly, that is a fantastic matchup. And I will go ahead and give you some stats for Montgomery here because obviously, if you're going to think about making this sort of a move, you got to have a lot of confidence in this one. Montgomery has averaged 26.2 fantasy points. That's a PPR scoring format over the last 2 games. 3 touchdowns over that stretch. He has had, and this is one of the reasons I actually have David Montgomery in a couple of spots this year. And earlier on in the season when he was struggling a little bit, taking a look at the matchups, he had a really nice run. He's had a really nice run of matchups down the stretch this year. And that has obviously played into his recent success. I know they've talked about the change in play calling in Chicago, that perhaps has a little bit to do with it. I really think it's the matchups more than anything. I'm not sure that the play calling has made that big of a difference there. I'm taking a look at Kamara's stats. I say Kamara and Kamara like regularly. I split between the two. I can't even tell you that I'm actually sure which is correct. At any rate, his stats over the past few games, this is on a PPR screen that I'm looking at. The last 3, which is the 3 games that Taysom Hill played, 10.5 fantasy points, 45 rushing yards, 5.7 fantasy points, 54 rushing yards. This last game was better, 16.7, 88 rushing yards. Did have a touchdown there on the ground. And again, this screen's not showing me the passing touchdowns there. Not sure if he had any in any of those games. I do think that you have to take that Week 12 game against Denver kind of out of the question. You have to kind of disregard that game because of the situation that the Broncos were dealing with. I don't really look at that so much as being relative to the other ones. I mean, Latavius Murray got a lot of work there. I'm sure with that huge lead they had and feeling confident in that game, they kind of just took it easy on Kamara and didn't really work him all that much. So I don't expect him to. I expect him to play well this weekend. But again, the matchup is there, and the volume. Will he see enough to get you what you need? I guess my question in this one is, where are you? Where do you feel you're at in looking at your matchup against your opponent? Do you think you need a safer floor, or do you think you need that guy that potentially has the bigger game? I think Montgomery probably, hard to say that over Kamara, probably has a chance to have the bigger game of these two simply because of the fact that, in that matchup, I mean, that's just a tremendous advantage, and he has played very well the past couple of weeks. So, yeah, I would think this is it would be tough for me to sit a guy like Alvin Kamara at any situation, but that matchup, Houston, the second most, and, they're giving up in terms of rushing yards. And obviously Montgomery, he's going to get all the volume there because, he's getting them both. It's rushing or it's passing. So his game script safe. Tough choice here. I don't envy you on this one. It's an early game and a late game. So you got to make that decision beforehand. As I said, I think Montgomery has the clear matchup value. So if that's what you favor, then I would say go with it. But to me, the tougher player of the two is Kamara. If you feel like you are in a very good spot against your opponent, then that obviously is going to impact your decision and perhaps who they have on their team. Perhaps, I don't know that there's really actually Taysom Hill doesn't really impact this, and neither does Mitchell Trubisky. So, yeah, it's going to be a tough choice. I like Montgomery as a start. Having said that, I would have a hard time sitting Kamara. I do think Montgomery is a fine start if you do decide to make that tough choice. And again, whichever way you go with that, I do hope that the guy that you choose crushes it. And I do see one more question from you here, and I will get that. Oh, here's another tough one. You say Tyler Lockett or Justin Jefferson. I will say this. I have a decision very similar to this one in one of my leagues for tomorrow where I'm deciding between Tyler Lockett and Corey Davis. And I've been around and around on this. Lockett this year has had those couple of big games, but his floor has not been there. Playing the Jets, let's put up the matchups. First of all, playing the Jets, it's obviously a great matchup. However, what I'm afraid of here is the Jets are going to offer so little resistance to the passing game. I feel like DK Metcalf is going to get his, and I don't see any reason for them to not go to him because he's that good. So that concerns me with Lockett. Again, that game is a 4 o'clock game on the road at Seattle. The Jets allowing the 10th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. Justin Jefferson, also a very nice matchup, and I will say in terms of who I expect to list as my starts and sits tomorrow, I actually will have Justin Jefferson, as soon as I find him, as my number 1 start on that list tomorrow, if that helps you out at all. Jefferson, Minnesota, let's find out what time they're playing at. They are on the road, 1 o'clock against Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay, the 9th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. Obviously, you saw that big day from Tyreek Hill against Tampa Bay. And Jefferson has been very good. I'll give you some of his stats just because I have those in the notes here. 17 plus fantasy points now in 4 straight games, 100 plus yards in 2 of those 4 games. And Tampa Bay has given up 19 or more fantasy points to 4 different wide receivers just in the last 3 games alone, including that big 57-9 to Tyreek Hill. I like Jefferson a lot. I think he's, believe it or not, disregarding the matchup, I want to almost say that Jefferson might be the safer play tomorrow. I feel the same way in my decision, and that's what I kind of came down to with, like I said, I have this same type of decision with Corey Davis. And I actually, when looking over the stats, believe it or not, even though Tennessee possibly relies on the run game more, I feel like Corey Davis is the safer play to Tyler Lockett. Again, this might come down for you is, do you feel like you need a floor type play, or do you feel like you need someone that might hit the big game? Certainly, Jefferson could have the big game, but Lockett, we've seen huge games this year so far. And so if he's able to put that together against the Jets with that matchup, it could be in the cards. I think of these two, again, I've been putting a lot of thought into a similar type decision here. I probably feel better in this one about Justin Jefferson. He's been so good lately, and we've seen Lockett struggle a little bit in terms of what you might expect, based on those huge games. And also the fact that Yahoo, I don't know if you guys play on Yahoo, it's where I play most of my leagues. They keep giving these huge projection numbers for Lockett, and it throws you off because you got to think to yourself, like, we haven't seen him have these big games. Ilias, I feel like it's Justin Jefferson here. Again, your roster is better than anybody. I always say that. I try to give you not just my opinion, but some information to go on with it just to try to help you make those decisions. I do hope that whichever guy you pick crushes it. I do think both of these guys have nice matchups here. I do think Justin Jefferson's a fine start, but I don't think that either one of them is necessarily a wrong choice for you to make. Just a matter of your expectations of what's going to happen there. Again, Ilias, glad to have you on the stream. We appreciate the chat, and we hope that either guy you pick crushes it as always. All right, and you said thank you. You said it right. Perfect. I'm so glad you let me know because I'm always wondering if I got these right. So, yeah, I'm jumping around the chats just a little bit. Bill Romanowski, thumbs up. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Appreciate all you guys giving us thumbs up. As we continue to grow, all that stuff helps. And for those of you that are new, if you just found us, we are a brand new channel this year on YouTube. So we don't necessarily come quite as high in the searches, but by all means, if you're new, and for those of you that are back, hit that subscribe button. Make sure that you get those notifications whenever we have new content. I will put up our promo here for you guys, and this is our main show. This is the TFF Live Sunday pregame show. That will be tomorrow, or actually, later today if you're on the East Coast. Sunday pregame show. We do that every Sunday at 12 noon. Same deal as this, taking your fantasy football questions all show long, but also a lot of other information going through actives and actives, starts and sits, all that good stuff for you guys. So if you haven't joined us for that show yet, and if you're up, even though it's a late night owl show tonight, if you want to join us tomorrow before the games as you're making those last minute decisions, by all means, come on over and join us for that show. All right, let me get back to the chats here. Let me see where I left off. I don't want to miss anybody. First, we will remind you guys that are on the stream, the live chat is open throughout the show. Regardless of what we're talking about, we will get to your chats as quickly as possible. That's what we love to do. And let me take a look at the next one here. I believe K. Ellis Talks is next. Welcome back, K. Ellis Talks. Glad to have you back with us tonight. You're saying PPR, start 2, Allen Robinson, Chase Claypool, Miles Sanders, DJ Chark, Tyler Boyd, J.K. Dobbins. All right, let's put up a little bit of information to help us out here. Let's see who we have more of. We'll go with the wide receivers first. I will say right away before I even start looking at anything here, my gut says Allen Robinson right off the bat has got to be one of the guys that you're looking at here. In that Chicago game against Houston, let's see, Houston fantasy points to wide receivers, where are they at? 11th. I will say this, I have Allen Robinson among my starts on tomorrow's show, so I do have a little bit more information already researched. Let's see, Houston has given up 4 100-plus yard receivers in the last 6 games alone. So they have been allowing a lot of passing yardage. Robinson, 7 or more targets now in 5 straight games, 15 or more fantasy points in 3 of those games, and 6 or more catches in all 5 of those games. I definitely do like Robinson tomorrow, so I'm going to say that's probably the first person that I will pick off of this list. As we look at some of the other matchups, starting with Chase Claypool. I'm hesitant with Claypool against the Bills. I'm wondering if he's going to get the bulk of Tre'Davious White's coverage in terms of that offense there. I feel like that's very possible there. That's the Sunday night game. Again, I'm in Buffalo, so I'm Bills Mafia. So in terms of rooting purposes, that's certainly a game that I'll be watching for. Fantasy football is completely different, and I try to keep those separate as best as possible. I will say the Bills, 23rd on the list on the left side of your screen. So that's the 10th fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. Certainly a lower matchup there than some of the others. However, concerns with these other wide receivers on this list. So we'll start with DJ Chark. Obviously, Mike Glennon is your quarterback there. We've seen a lack of production from Chark in the past few weeks as they've gone through their quarterback struggles. Jacksonville, let's take a look at that matchup. That is a 1 p.m. game, home against Tennessee. The matchup is good, 5th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. Clearly, I think if you're talking the difference between Mike Glennon and Ben Roethlisberger, you give the edge there to the Claypool side of things. Again, here's the same situation with Tyler Boyd. I've kind of gone back and forth on him for tomorrow as well. Brandon Allen, the quarterback situation there, that is not great. That is a 1 p.m. game home against Dallas. Obviously, a great matchup. 4th most fantasy points, as you see, to the wide receiver spot. So of the matchups, I mean, Boyd is the best matchup, and Chark is slightly behind. However, there's such a concern there. You're not certainly docking them on their ability, but in terms of the quarterback play, you don't know exactly what you're going to get there. Let's take a look at your running backs that you have here. I will say right off the bat, I am very hesitant on Miles Sanders at this point. I expected Sanders to have a much better game than he had last week, and he did not. Those sorts of things make me hesitant right off the bat. The volume hasn't seemed to be there. Jalen Hurts is the starter. Who knows? Does that change things? It's just puts a big question mark on that game in what was already a questionable play that you're seeing out of the Eagles this year. That is a 4:25 game, home against New Orleans. New Orleans currently allowing the fewest fantasy points, as you see, the running back position. So I think a lot of concerns there with Sanders. Probably not the guy I'm leaning towards here. J.K. Dobbins, the next guy on your list. That is the Monday night game on the road against Cleveland. Cleveland 24th. So the 9th fewest fantasy points to the running back spot. Dobbins, I think, out of the guys in Baltimore between Dobbins, Edwards, and Ingram, I think if you have to trust one of those guys, I think he's the guy that you trust the most. Even though we did see a big game from Edwards, I do think that Dobbins, without looking at the stats, had more of the volume than the other guys did there. So I would probably trust him a little bit more. Again, this probably comes down to, I think your second guy is probably between Claypool and Dobbins, honestly. Even though I don't feel great about Claypool in terms of the Bills matchup, and if he does see Tre'Davious White, the best of the quarterbacks available throwing the ball to him, and we know that Pittsburgh is going to keep throwing the ball. We've seen that all year long, even in spots where you think, the guy's James Conner is going to have a nice day. We've seen Pittsburgh just continue to throw the ball. So you have to expect Claypool to continue to get the volume. Let's look up real quick since I'm talking about his volume, and I want to make sure and cover all the bases here. I'm going to look up here what he's done the past few games. Again, this is a half-point PPR screen that I'm looking at. Okay, well, I guess I should say that a little bit less in terms of the volume. This last game against Washington, only 4 targets, 2 catches, 38 yards. The game before that, 9 targets, before that 8, and then 10, 13 as we go back. So he's seen plenty of targets with the exception of this last game. I do not know specifically if there is a report here that he didn't practice Thursday based on an illness, doesn't update it on Friday. So I don't see anything here like wanting to make you think he might not play. Again, since that's a later game, that's a little bit of a concern. But yeah, as I talk about his volume and then I actually look up the stats, I see that the volume wasn't necessarily there. I think it's for me between, it just depends on if you want to go matchup wise or if you want to go talent wise. I think if you're trusting who is the player in the better situation, it's between Claypool and Dobbins. If you want to trust the matchup, then I think I don't think it brings DJ Chark into the picture, but I do think it potentially brings Tyler Boyd into the picture because we've seen Dallas be so poor against the pass this year. I definitely think that Robinson is your first guy. Probably my gut here says there are fewer questions with Claypool than the others. That's my gut. But again, I always try to give you as much information as possible rather than just saying who I like, because I want you to be, have some information to back that up when you make that decision. Always trust your gut. You know your roster as good as anybody. I like Robinson for sure. And then I think that Claypool, I want to lean Claypool. I don't say it with a lot of confidence over the other guys. I think it's a little bit of a coin flip. There are other possibilities there. And certainly I think Boyd's matchup is probably the best of all possibilities there. So yeah, and again, with those times, I don't know if there's an opportunity to kind of keep an eye on it and see where you're at, just to kind of make sure that you're getting what you need in terms of the potentials there. I'm guessing those are early games, Cincinnati an early game. Yeah, you don't really have much room to wiggle there. So yeah, definitely like Robinson, and then go with your gut on that last one. But I think to me, I would probably feel safest with Claypool if it was me making that decision. And again, KLS Talks, thank you for being on the stream. And again, whoever you choose, hope they crush it. And I hope you're moving right into those fantasy playoffs. All right, let me get rid of the left side of your screen, get us ready for the next chat. Let me see if there's anything follow-ups here that I missed here. No, I don't think so. So we will move on to the next one. All right. And here's a chat from Little Rami 45. This looks like a new viewer to the stream. So welcome, Little Rami 45. Glad that you found us tonight. And you say, pick 3, McLaurin, MT. Hold on, I'm thinking, what am I missing here on MT? Higgins, Landry, and Metcalf. Tell me what I'm missing here with MT. Am I losing my mind? It's only, what time is it tonight? It's only 1 o'clock in the morning. I should be knowing. Let me look and see if there's a follow-up already from here. Tell me what I'm missing here with MT. I shouldn't be losing my mind. I'll start looking at the other guys while you follow up in the chat here. Let's put up on the left side of the screen. These are all wide receivers. I will say you got to take a look at T. Higgins, as he is potentially, I think he's questionable for tomorrow's game. So that's going to be something to look at in terms of this decision. I will try to figure out if I'm losing my mind on who MT is as I talk my way through these. So here we go. McLaurin, Washington, playing at a 4:25 game on the road against San Francisco. San Francisco, not a great matchup, I don't think. 15th, there they are. Halfway point in terms of fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. T. Higgins for Cincinnati against Dallas. Obviously, we talked about that matchup already. 4th, a great matchup there. Quarterback issues, and potentially keep an eye on whether or not Higgins is a little banged up. Jarvis Landry, I will say, I'm fading Jarvis Landry tomorrow. I don't think I like him all that much in that matchup. Monday night, home against Baltimore. Baltimore rougher, 27. So that is the 6th fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. DK Metcalf is a absolute 5-star. Start him all day. If you can keep playing DK Metcalf every week against the New York Jets, then please do. I mean, that would be great. The Jets' 10th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. So yeah, Metcalf is my number one choice out of all these players. Let me see if there's a follow-up from you here. And Michael Thomas, Takashi says, Michael Thomas, thank you. I see I'm already losing my mind. I appreciate that. Guys always have my back. Let me go back to that. Yeah, I don't think you sit Michael Thomas here. By all means, I do think that the matchup, let's take a look here. New Orleans on the road, Philadelphia. Philadelphia is 16th, so right the midway point in terms of fantasy points to wide receivers. However, Michael Thomas is a stud. Taysom Hill, again, I think you disregard that game against Denver. We've seen a good amount of targets. Let me just look that up to make sure that I'm not misspeaking. I know the targets were there in the game before the Denver game for Thomas, but I don't recall off the top of my head what he had for targets in this last game. I don't remember that it was awful. Oh, yeah, 11 targets, 9 catches. So 2 games against Atlanta, 23 targets, 18 catches over those 2 games. He had 104 yards the first of the 2 and 105 the second of the 2. Throw out that Denver game. Yes, the production wasn't there. I don't blame that on Taysom Hill. that was what it was going to be because of the situation for Denver. So yeah, we're playing Metcalf here. We're playing Michael Thomas, and then the next guy is a pick'em. I would probably say if I have to rely on, again, the four things I talk about are ability, volume, matchup, and game script. Terry McLaurin, to me, is the top player out of those other players that are available. He certainly has the most upside. I would think the matchup is not great. San Francisco, 15th, although they are at the midway point. I mean, when you look at, even talking about, Philadelphia against New Orleans is 16th. So I don't think the matchup necessarily has to scare you away, even though San Francisco you think of as a top defense. I think I like McLaurin there as the next guy. Metcalf and Michael Thomas for sure. Those would be my picks. Higgins concerns quarterback, and also concerns possibly being banged up, and Landry, tough matchup there for Cleveland playing against Baltimore. So yeah, I like Metcalf, Thomas, and McLaurin as your picks. Again, I try to give you some information to back that up, but as I always say, I hope whoever you pick crushes it. And Little Rami 45, again, looks like you're a new viewer to the stream. Appreciate you being here. And if you like what we're doing here, be sure to click that subscribe button. Make sure you get those notifications when we have new content. And I know you might have worked a little harder to find us tonight. We're glad that you did, and appreciate you being with us on the live stream. All right, let me see if there's any follow-ups here that I missed before as I'm going through. I don't see that there. So let's move on to the next one. All right, where are we at here? Takashi 6400. What's up, bro? What's going on? I haven't watched you in a minute. Glad to have you back, Takashi 6400. Appreciate all you regulars being here. And we got a question from you. You say Pittman, Antonio Brown, Marvin Jones, pick one standard. All right, look, we're going to take a look at matchups here because this might be a little bit of a tricky one. I'm going to say I don't think I pick Antonio Brown because we just haven't seen it there from him, even though the matchup is there. But I will start out with Pittman because that's the order that you put him in. That's a 4:05 game on the road at Las Vegas. Las Vegas on the left side of your screen, the 13th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spots. Antonio Brown for Tampa Bay. That is a 1 p.m. game, home against Minnesota. I know the matchup is there, second most fantasy points to wide receivers. I just don't love the workload that Brown's been getting. Perhaps he could break out at some point, but we haven't really seen it yet. Again, I'm not looking at his targets right here in front of me, but I do think that Mike Evans is in line for a nice day tomorrow, and potentially Chris Godwin as well. Marvin Jones is interesting because Kenny Golladay is out again this week. Let me see, where is the matchup that I'm looking for here? Detroit. That is a 4:25 game at home against Green Bay. Green Bay's matchup on the left side of your screen, 25th. So 8th fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. What I want to do here is I want to look up Marvin Jones's numbers. Because I think that my gut is saying that out of these guys, that might be your pick, just based on the fact that, when you have your top wide receiver out and a guy that can potentially slide in as the number one and get that volume, I think you might lean that way. Oh, yeah, the last two games, 12 targets in week 12 against Houston, 12 targets in week 13 at Chicago. This is at a half-point PPR. It says 21.60 points. There was 8 catches, so if you tack that on, another 4 points gets you to the full PPR. That's 25.6 last week, 116 yards with a touchdown. Certainly Chicago, not a good matchup. So if he was able to do that against the Bears, Green Bay, also in the red, but still a little bit higher up. So yeah, I think he certainly has the potential to also put up some nice numbers against Green Bay. I will have to say probably it's Marvin Jones in this one, simply because of you think the volume could potentially be there. Pittman, we've seen T.Y. Hilton come on for the Colts and start to take up some of that work there. And Brown, let me look at Brown because I don't want to completely misspeak. Perhaps I don't have Brown on any of my rosters. So I'm not super as familiar as some of the other players. So let's look that up and make sure that I'm not misspeaking as soon as I type the right numbers in. All right, so Brown, the last couple of games, 3 targets. The last game they played before their bye in Week 12, he did have 13 targets in Week 11. However, even with 13 targets, 8 catches. This is on a half-point PPR screen. That's 9.8. So if you're talking standard, you subtract that extra 4. That was just a 5.8 game there. So, yeah, even though he did have the targets, still didn't really see. It's hard to trust. I mean, certainly you trust the talent and you expect at some point that he will break out, but it's just hard to plug him into that lineup not having seen it yet. I certainly don't fault you if you like that talent-wise, being the best out of those three. But I think if I had to go with my gut on this one, it's Marvin Jones, simply because of that volume. I think he has a good chance to see that again. And obviously, you know, in a game like last week against Chicago, you know, you'd be hesitant because of that matchup, and he still had a great game. So that makes me less hesitant about the matchup. And again, Matthew Stafford, this is a quarterback that is so strange to me, because you look at matchups for Matthew Stafford, the games you expect him to struggle, he plays great. And the games you expect him to play great, he struggles. So again, this is probably, I don't have the quarterback. Let me put the quarterback numbers up just to back up what I'm saying here. So yeah, Detroit, Green Bay to the quarterback spot, 25th, 8th fewest. So as I've tried to predict Matthew Stafford so far this year, I'm basically at the point where if it's a bad matchup, I expect Stafford to play awesome. If it's a great matchup, I expect Stafford to just be meh, you know. And so, yeah, this is a tough matchup, a tougher matchup, but I think it'll be a good day. And the Lions have seemed to play better since Darrell Bevell took over there for Matt Patricia. So, yeah, I will say this is my gut. I say Marvin Jones out of these three. But, again, trust your gut. Try to give you some information to back that up so that whichever guy you pick, you can make a good choice. And, again, hope that guy crushes it. And Tekashi 6,400. Let me take a look if there are any follow-ups here. I do see some from you, but I think they were all on other stuff. And thank you for letting me know about the Michael Thomas. I do appreciate that. So, yeah, I think that's the only one. Let me know if I'm missing anything here. Tekashi 6,400. But, again, hope wherever you pick, I hope they crush it. All right, next guy up here is Baby Jesus, or perhaps from the Big Lebowski, that is Jesus. Not sure which way that goes, but I think you might be a new viewer to the stream. So, Baby Jesus, thanks for being with the stream, and glad that you found us tonight. And you say, need flex since Gaskin is out. Gio Bernard, Michael Pittman, or DeAndre Washington. So let's put up some numbers, and I'm going to say right off the bat, without looking at matchups, my gut, even though he hasn't played well, is with Gio Bernard here. You just have to question why it hasn't happened so far for him with Joe Mixon out. The matchup there, obviously the Brandon Allen thing plays into that. Cincinnati at home against Dallas. That's a 1 p.m. game. Dallas allowing the 6th most fantasy points to the running back spot. You see that on the left side of your screen there. It's a great matchup. He certainly is in line to get all of the volume. I don't know that there's any, I don't think that I'm not guessing that his workload is going to go away. I don't think that has anything to do with why he hasn't played well. Taking a look at the other guys. First, we'll look at Washington for the Dolphins. Let's see what time that is. A 1 p.m. game, home against Kansas City. Kansas City has been giving it up to the run. 13th most fantasy points to the running back spot. The question mark there is, does DeAndre Washington get the workload? And also check his reports, because I do think I saw that he is recovering possibly from an injury. Don't quote me, because I'm not sure off the top of my head, but I do think there might be some sort of an injury concern there. Patrick Laird perhaps is in the mix more than we might expect. On the flip side of that, if we look at the wide receiver side for Michael Pittman, that is a 4:05 p.m. game on the road against Las Vegas. And Las Vegas, the 13th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. I think, to me, if this wasn't the first game we were potentially seeing DeAndre Washington, I might feel otherwise about this. But this sometimes is a trap. We saw this last week with Devontae Booker for the Raiders. We all expected, including me. I plugged him in above Nyheim Hines in one of my leagues, and Booker didn't get it done. If we were more certain about that workload, it would be different. We can guess that the workload's going to be there, but we really don't have much to go on. So to me, that makes your choice between Bernard and Pittman here. I think the matchups are pretty good for both of them. I think perhaps it comes down to your format. Are you a standard format, or are you a full PPR? I think Bernard in a standard format perhaps gets the nod. If you're PPR, perhaps you go with Pittman. My gut is Bernard here, but I think either one of those are in play. So I don't think it's the worst choice between the two. I would say probably go with your gut between those two. But I think Gio Bernard, it's both of them. You could find question marks. Let me look up real quick. Let me just look up Pittman's numbers in these past couple of games, because obviously I do know that T.Y. Hilton has started to come on there in that offense. I want to kind of see what that did to his usage. So last game, 5 targets against Houston, 5 catches, 7.1. Oh, that's in a half-point PPR format. The game before that, it was still 9 targets, only 2 catches, 3.80 points. So we did see 2 nice games before that, and then a little bit of a drop-off. Certainly the Houston matchup was a good one. The Tennessee matchup was a good one. So that gives you a little bit of pause for concern with Pittman, the same way as you do have, with Bernard, the fact that he hasn't produced. So I'm going to call up Bernard's numbers just to give equal time here to both sides of this. Again, this is a half-point PPR screen that I'm looking at. The last 4 games, 6.7, 7.5, 5.9, 3.9. He's seen reasonable workload, but it's tough because, you guess that Cincinnati is going to end up, falling behind. Not necessarily against Dallas, but usually they're playing from behind, and that's going to hurt his rush ability. I'm just looking for any other reports. Yeah, he hasn't topped 32 rushing yards in any of his previous games. A little bit of a tough choice. I probably trust Bernard there still. I don't love it, but I probably trust Bernard there. At least you're leaning on hopefully the fact that the volume carries you through and that Dallas is pretty bad and that he perhaps falls into the end zone and gives you some points there. So, again, a little bit of a gut choice for you, but whichever guy you pick, I hope that they crush it for you. And baby Jesus, thanks for being here on the stream. If you are a new viewer, by all means, go ahead and hit that subscribe. Make sure you're able to get those notifications whenever we have new content. All right, let me see here if there's any follow-ups further down the line here before I get on to the next. And let's see here. Takashi 6400 thank you for your help, brother. No, thank you, Takashi, for being here. Appreciate all you guys being on the stream. I think that takes us to our next pick here as I try to, and again, I said this before on some of the other live streams. If I miss a chat, please jump in there and let me know. I try not to miss any of them, but sometimes, I'm looking on the streaming service that I'm using here, scrolling up and down through these chats. Sometimes I miss them. I don't mean to. So if I do, just give me a chat back and say, hey, you missed mine, and I'll go back and get it. Munir N, if I'm saying that right, I hope. Munir N, welcome to the stream. Looks like you might be a new viewer. Glad that you found us tonight. You say pick a flex, Godwin, Gallman, Debo, Drake, or Dobbins. I'm starting Hopkins, Ridley, Chubb, and Henry. All right, let's take a look at some matchups. We will start with the wide receiver spot because that's the first that you mentioned. So in terms of Chris Godwin, Tampa Bay, home, 1 p.m. game to Minnesota, a great matchup, the second most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. Godwin, we know, has had some injury issues with the finger. I don't know. I'm going to check reports on him real quick before I move on to the next person because I don't know if there's been any updates there in terms of what he's dealing with. I don't think there's any issues that I'm aware of. Practice in full Thursday, missed Wednesday's practice after having, the surgery from his left index finger. Don't seem to be any concerns here. Workload-wise, targets have been there the past couple of games. 10 targets in Week 11, 9 targets in Week 12, 7 catches, 8 catches. So, the work's been there. So the matchup is there. So right off the bat, I think Godwin is in play to potentially be the guy that we pick out of these options here. Deebo Samuel, another player that's been very good lately. Their matchup 425, home against Washington, a tougher one there. Second fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver spot, as you see. So not a great matchup. I do think that they're gonna go to Deebo and they're still gonna work him in. But between the two, I think the edge of those two is to Godwin if you're looking to play a wide receiver as that flex. If we take a look at your running back options, you have Wayne Gallman for the New York Football Giants. And let's see, they are a 1 p.m. game, home against Arizona. Arizona 14th in terms of fantasy points to the running back spot. Gallman certainly has been very good as of recent. I know I checked his stats on an earlier stream. We'll check him again now, but I have a feeling I don't remember if he hit the end zone last week or not, but he has certainly found the end zone a ton in recent games. Did not have a rushing touchdown last week, but did have 135 yards on the ground against Seattle. In the prior 5 games, 6 touchdowns. So Gallman has been great for the Giants. I think that, with Daniel Jones most likely back, I think that's even better for their offense there and potentially not falling behind as much in that game. Shouldn't say falling behind. They beat Seattle. But at any rate, I think that is a very reasonable choice. Kenyon Drake, I haven't been real high on him. Obviously, they're playing the Giants. Same game there. The Giants, 12th most fantasy points to the running back spot. I do think that Kenyon Drake has an injury concern this week. He is, listed as questionable for this game, and the report shows limited in Thursday's practice with a hip. That's a new injury, so something to look for there. It does say we don't see anything since Thursday, so not sure that anything has gotten worse there. However, me personally, I have not been high on Kenyon Drake this year. So when you add that to potential injury concerns, perhaps there's a little bias there because I had Kenyon Drake in a couple of spots, traded him away where I could. Just, as a high draft pick, the performance wasn't there. So I might have a little bit of bias in that one, but you can't blame me so much. J.K. Dobbins for Baltimore. That is Monday night on the road at Cleveland. Cleveland, not a great matchup, 24th. So that's the 9th fewest fantasy points to the running back spot. And again, you're talking about the 3 running backs there in Baltimore, Ingram, Dobbins, and Edwards. To me, Gallman, is going to get, he's the guy. And so I think he is out of your choices. I think he is your top running back choice there. I think Godwin is your top wide receiver choice. And I do think that either one of them is a fine choice for tomorrow. Godwin has a great matchup. And also Gallman against Arizona, the matchup not quite as great. So that's 14th. And then Godwin against Minnesota is 2nd. So to me, like if you're gonna boil it down to matchups, Godwin probably has the edge. Gallman is probably a safer floor and certainly has been playing great. So I don't think you can go wrong. I think either one of those guys is a fine start tomorrow. I'm looking to see if there are any follow-ups before I wrap that up as my choices. But yeah, I would say Godwin, Gallman. To me, certainly the matchup advantage is Godwin. I think the safer floor is probably the matchup advantage is Godwin. I don't know. That's probably what I said. The safer floor is probably Gallman. You get these players with similar names. I would say this. You didn't know what format it is. If it's standard, I'd probably give that nod to Gallman. If it's full PPR, I'd probably give that nod to Godwin. And if it's half point, I'd probably say coin flip. I don't think either one of these is a bad choice. If it were me, I probably gut-wise might go with Gallman here if I had to pick one of those two. But again, I don't think you're wrong for either of those guys in this particular situation. Again, Manir N, welcome to the stream. Glad to have you on. If you are a new viewer, appreciate the chat. And again, as I always say, I hope whoever you pick, I hope they crush it for you. And also, if this is playoffs for you, good luck in that playoffs matchup. All right, let me get this off the left side of the screen. Let me give a quick reminder here before we move on. Let me put up our information, and we are the Fantasy Follow. We are a brand new channel here on YouTube this season. We appreciate you guys for finding us. We do know that, because we're new and still growing, we don't necessarily come up quite as high in the searches. So if you had to work a little bit harder to find us, we appreciate you being here. And for those of you regulars, we're glad to have you back. Either way, make sure that you hit that subscribe button so you can get those notifications whenever we have new content. And we are moving along towards our goal of 100 new subscribers. So we do appreciate all of you that have become a part of that along the way this season. We are also on Twitter at the Fantasy Follow, and that's fantasy spelled FNTSY. You can also send us your fantasy football questions there during the week using the hashtag AskTFFLive. We will answer those questions live on our Sunday pregame show. Facebook / Fantasy Follow, website, fantasyfollow.com. All right. The name of the show tonight is Saturday Stars, and this show is not about starts and sits. We do our top matchups for the weekend's games ahead. That is the content for our show. However, we don't do that content until we go through these live chats. That's what we're here for. That's what we love to do. So we'll let you know the live chat is open. Here to answer your fantasy football questions all show long. If we're talking about something else, don't worry. Drop us a chat. We will get to it. And if I have to wait to do the content until later on the show, that's fine by me. We would rather be talking. I always say this wrong. That's what I try to say. We'd rather be talking with you than talking to you. So, yeah, absolutely. We're glad to have you here. And please, if you have questions, drop in the chat. All right. I do see a couple. I want to run through a couple of these other ones that are not necessarily questions, but just follow-ups. Takashi 6400, a follow-up. Champions take chances. I think that was referring to an earlier choice between Kamara and I don't see where the Kamara and Montgomery. Scared money don't make money. That's what they always say, right? So yeah, that is a possible one there. But then you say I think you go Kamara, hard to sit. I agree with both sides of that. So yeah, we'll see what happens in that one. That's a tough one. I don't envy you with that choice. I do see a new one. Looks like we got a question here. This is from how do I say this? Shushka. I'm going to guess on that one. Tell me if I'm saying that right or if that's intended to be said differently, but that's what I'm going to go with. And Shushka, if you are new to the stream, which I think that you might be. Welcome. Glad to have you aboard and glad that you found us tonight for our TFF live show. You say J.K. Dobbins or Josh Jacobs. Ooh, boy, this is a tough one because do we know if Josh Jacobs is going to be fully healthy for tomorrow? Let's put up the matchups. Take a look. J.K. Dobbins. Let's see. That's the Monday night game on the road. Cleveland allowing they're 24th on the list, so that is the 9th fewest fantasy points to the running back spot. So they are in the red, and of course, you got to worry about who gets the work there with Edwards and Ingram also in the mix. I do think that Dobbins has the best chance to get the bulk of the workload there and has proven that as the season has gone along. Josh Jacobs, home against Indianapolis. That's a 4:05 game. Indianapolis. So here's the deal with the Colts. There, as you see on our list there, 20th. That's the 13th fewest fantasy points to the running back spot. They have been climbing this list in the past few weeks. Obviously, they've had some injury concerns on defense. Teams have started to hit them a little bit more. I am not feeling as concerned necessarily with the Colts D at this point of the season as you might have been earlier on. In looking at them as a defense, they had a lot of nice matchups in a row that made you feel a lot better as to how good they were on defense. Now it's gotten a little bit tougher, and we've seen them climb that list, all the way up to 20th now. So the defense, the matchup doesn't concern me quite as much with Jacobs here. And obviously the Baltimore matchup against Cleveland. Cleveland is actually a little bit tougher in terms of where they're at right now, fantasy points-wise, allowed to that running back spot. I like Jacobs here, but obviously the concern is he fully healthy? And that makes a difference. So let me put up, let's do this. Let me take down this comment, and if this helps you out, Coach Speak doesn't always help you out, but I do have from John Gruden, and this was yesterday, talking about Josh Jacobs in terms of this weekend.
Yeah, it always helps to have your feature back in action. I mean, it'll make a lot of guys like Josh Jacobs. So hopefully he's ready to go, and if he is, we'll make sure we hand him the ball. But he's a great back, and normally a great back makes great things happen, and that's what we need from our go-to guy.
So there you have it from John Gruden. Here's the deal: like, they brought in Spencer Ware early this week to kind of kick the tires. That doesn't tell me that they're altogether confident in Jacobs being fully healthy here. And obviously he didn't play last week. Question marks there. I'm looking at the times of these games. So this is a 4:00 game, and obviously the Dobbins game is a Monday night game. I think that you'll probably know more by the time you get to that 4:00 game and have to make this decision. Perhaps that will help you out, give you some extra time to at least kind of look at that matchup in terms of who you're playing against your opponent, and kind of try to figure out, if you think you can take a chance on Jacobs here and not knowing potentially if he's injured. I feel better doing that if you know that you have a big lead by that point in the day in your matchup. Dobbins, believe it or not, you might actually feel a little bit safer, even though, the workload is always a concern there. Jacobs could play a couple of snaps and leave that game, and hard to say what you're going to get there. So I like Jacobs if he's healthy. Keep an eye on your reports. I think if there's nothing here that tells you otherwise, I think you go with Jacobs. But if it starts to sound questionable, or if they start to not sound as confident as you would like to hear them, then you might be able to make that switch. But yeah, I think that's the path that I would choose in terms of working this one out, and then just kind of taking it from there. But again, it's always nice when you have that later game, because let's face it, if you are in a matchup where you need a bigger game at that point at 4:00, certainly the upside is with Jacobs in this matchup. So if you're trailing in your matchup, when you take a look at that and you feel like you need that big game, that's going to help you make that decision one way or the other. Obviously, like I said, if Jacobs is healthy, I like him. And as I always say, whichever guy you pick, I hope they crush it. And Shushka, appreciate you being on the stream. Again, you look like a new viewer. So if you are, glad that you found us tonight, and hope that you enjoy everything that we're doing here on our live streams. Be glad to have you back on future live streams as well. Let me just see if there are any follow-ups. And you say, okay, thank you. And I say, nope, thank you, as I always say to all you guys for being in the chat. And you say, wow. And then you say, good plan. Well, I hope that, hey, listen, I hope that no matter what, I hope you're in those playoffs right now, or if your playoffs start next week, I hope that you're able to crush it and get in a nice spot as you go forward here. And, hopefully take down that fantasy football championship. That's what we all play for. This is the time of the year for that. So again, glad to have you on the stream, and I hope you crush it absolutely in that matchup this weekend. All right, let me scroll down the next pick here. Sorry, not pick. What are we picking? The next chat. It's from Mary to Don. Welcome back, Mary to Don, to the stream. Glad to have you again, one of our regulars. You say Corey Davis or T.Y. Hilton. Interesting choice here. Let's put up our left side of the screen, wide receiver matchups, and we'll work through both of these first. So I like the matchup a lot for Corey Davis. This is a road game, 1 o'clock at Jacksonville. Jacksonville allowing the 6th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. T.Y. Hilton, Indianapolis. That is a 4 p.m. game on the road at Las Vegas. Vegas, the 13th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. We have seen a couple big games to T.Y. Hilton as of late. My gut still says Corey Davis between these two, even though Corey Davis is an interesting player to me here because so often he kind of gets lost in the shadow of A.J. Brown, because A.J. Brown is so great. But Corey Davis has kind of quietly had a pretty nice season. He had a big game. Obviously, Brown had that ankle injury. I think it was an ankle injury this past game. Oh, look at that. Now, why did my light go off? See, that shouldn't have happened. I might have to put up a promo and fix that light because that frustrates me. That shouldn't have gone off. I got it plugged in tonight. It's gone off before. Anyways, I'll keep answering your questions. So let me see here. Cleveland, that game against Cleveland, 12 targets, 11 catches, 182 yards with a touchdown, and that was a half-point PPR, 29.70 points. 2 big games out of the last 3 weeks. He's had over 100 receiving yards. I definitely like Corey Davis here. And also you have to factor in A.J. Brown. Do we know if he's fully healthy in this game? Is he perhaps working a little bit more as a decoy? And does Davis see a little bit of bump in volume as a result? So I do like Corey Davis here. I'm going to call up T.Y. Hilton stats as well because obviously he's been very good. And I do have T.Y. Hilton on my list as – no, I did not make him a start for tomorrow, but I had him in under consideration. Of course, I can't call up his name when I try to look for his stats. Come on, T.Y. Hilton. There we are. All right, so the last 2 games have been the good games for Hilton after struggling a lot of the season. He had 81 yards week 12. That was against Tennessee. And then he had 110 yards last week at Houston, had a touchdown in both of those games. I certainly don't dislike T.Y. Hilton. I just think of these two, you probably trust Davis because he has seen more production season long than Hilton has. Obviously, Hilton did have some games where he did struggle a little bit earlier on in the season. You would like to think that that's picked up, but my gut here is Davis between these two. I think you could probably make an argument the other way as well, but to me, I think you probably take Davis in this one. And again, as I always say, whichever guy you pick, I hope that they absolutely crush it. So, all right, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to put up this live chat is open. For those of you that are with me, bear with me for a second. I'm going to put up our information just to give me something to put on the screen so that you don't see me actually, doing this. But I got to figure out why this light went off because I have it plugged in. I'm still here. Don't anybody leave us. I have no idea why my light went off. I certainly like to have that light on in the background. Let me just find out. Oh, well, I guess we're not going to have our backlights look for the rest of the night because I don't know why this went off. So, all right, no big deal. We'll deal with it some other time. All right, I'm back. Forget the light. We're going to have no nice backlight for the rest of the show, but that's okay. We can still answer fantasy football questions. All right. Sorry about that, everybody. I don't know why that happened, but it frustrates me. But, you put all this work into making things work, and sometimes they don't go your way. But that's what happened there. So, at any rate, back to our questions, and you just got a plain background, but no biggie. All right, let's find out where I left off. Mary to Don. All right, you said I'm benching Murray for Ryan Tannehill. I don't disagree with that at all. I think that Ryan Tannehill is going to be a fine start tomorrow, and I actually have him as one of my starts in the start sits that we do tomorrow on the Sunday pregame show. Back in focus, camera. All right, well, we'll deal with that. Let me see if there are any other follow-ups here from you along the way. I don't think so. So good to get that information through. Thank you, Mary to Don, again, for being with us, one of our regulars. Glad to have you on, and we will look forward to having you on our future streams. See, this is all sorts of technical problems tonight. The light goes out. The camera doesn't want to focus itself anymore. All right, here's what we're going to do. Here's what we're going to do. Hold on. Here, put up our promo for the Sunday pregame show, and I'll try to fix the camera. This is ridiculous. One of these nights. Oh, well, forget it. We'll be out of focus for a while. There we go. My goodness. What time is it? Is it just because it's 1:30 in the morning that these things are happening? Who knows? All right, let's get back to the chats. Hopefully everything else works out the way we want it for the rest of the show. All right. AB Goldberger, welcome back to the stream. Glad to have you. You say pick 2 running backs and a flex. Mostert, Taylor, Gallman, McKissick, Chark, Debo, Hilton. All right, let's take a look at some of these matchups. Let's start with the running back spot, since that's who you listed first here. Let's take a look at Raheem Mostert. That is a 425 game, home against Washington. They are currently allowing the 3rd fewest fantasy points to the running back spot. Jonathan Taylor, Indianapolis, on the road, 4 p.m., Las Vegas, the 4th most fantasy points to the running back spot. Wayne Gallman for the New York Football Giants. That is a home game, 1 p.m. against Arizona. They are at 14th on the matchup slide there for you. J.D. McKissick for Washington. That is 425. San Francisco is at 26th, 7th fewest to the running back spot. So that's all of your running backs. I think for me, it's Taylor and Gallman. If I have to pick here, I think Taylor had a great game last week. The matchup is there against Las Vegas, so you would expect, the rushing yards to be there for him. Gallman has been great the whole way through. Mostert has been a little bit of a struggle, and you never know what's going to happen with Shanahanigans there in that backfield. Jeff Wilson getting some work there, and just that 1 week always gets to me where I remember it was Jerick McKinnon, when Mostert was out, and all of a sudden they just benched him. They're like, oh yeah, after the game, they're like, yeah, well, we probably needed some rest. I'm like, well, great. Thank you. Those of us who play fantasy football, we really appreciated that. So yeah, I think Taylor and Gallman, I like those 2 picks there. I think McKissick's going to be all right, but I don't think it's necessarily the top matchup. Let me take a look at, we'll keep them in mind perhaps as your flex pick. But if we took a look at your wide receivers that you have here, all right, DJ Chark, that is, let's see, home game against Tennessee, 1 p.m. I don't love it with Mike Glennon throwing passes there, but nonetheless, the matchup is good. 5th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. Debo Samuel, not as good of a matchup. 425 Washington, 31st. 2nd fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. T.Y. Hilton of Las Vegas, 4 o'clock. T.Y. Hilton, Las Vegas. They're at 13th on the matchup board there in terms of fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. Out of those guys, in terms of the receiver, I think I probably don't pick Chark, even though I like the matchup, just because we haven't seen great production when they've been shuffling those quarterbacks. He might have a great game, but the problem is that you have to look at it, and just all you can really say is he might. Debo, I think it's the workload there for San Francisco, even though the matchup is tougher. I think he's in play for that choice. T.Y. Hilton has played well. I think he's in play for that choice. I think I probably like Debo or T.Y. over Mostert or McKissick as the flex pick. So I think you're talking about those 2 running backs, Taylor and Gallman, and then sliding in one of those 2 receivers, whichever you feel more comfortable with. I do think Debo continues to see a great workload there in that offense. Obviously, the matchup is tougher against Washington. I think T.Y. Hilton has the matchup edge, perhaps more of a question mark in terms of the workload that he gets, but he has had 2 great games back to back. So I think that you can look back at that in terms of making this decision. To me, coin flip between those 2, probably based on what they've done. And this is the fallback, is when you base things on what they've done, who knows if that works out every week the same way. I think T.Y. Hilton is probably who I'm leaning towards with my gut. But I always say, your roster is as good as anybody. Go with your gut on that one. I like Taylor. Gallman as fine starts for the running backs. I think it's between Debo and Hilton for the flex pick, and I probably lean just a little bit towards Hilton right now. But again, I hope that whoever you pick, I hope they crush it. And again, thank you, AB Goldberger, for being with us and being back as one of our regulars. We do appreciate you being on the stream. All right, let me slide down and see what we got next here. I got one from K. Ellis Talks, and you say PPR, Robert Tonyan or Mark Andrews, Hunt, Jacobs, or Dobbins. So I'm going to assume these are 2 separate choices and not like a pick one. Mark Andrews, I will give a quick sneak preview in terms of my start-sit list that I will have on tomorrow's Sunday pregame show. Mark Andrews is my number 1. He is my number 2 start on the start-sit list tomorrow for tight ends. I actually have Robert Tonyan as a sit tomorrow. So between those 2, I have Tonyan as the better play, but I will put up the information that goes behind that just to kind of help rather than just telling you who I like. I always like to put up information where I can. So starting with Tunyon for Green Bay, that is on the road at Detroit, 425. Detroit, a tougher matchup than you might think. It surprised me a little bit that they were this low on the list in terms of fantasy points to tight ends, but they are 25th. So that's the 8th fewest fantasy points to the tight end spot, likely because of the fact that, Detroit has been behind in a lot of games. They've been vulnerable in other spots. Potentially there isn't as much need for those tight end points, and that's why they haven't gone there. In terms of Andrews for Baltimore, that's obviously the Monday night game on the road at Cleveland. Cleveland, in terms of the matchup, is, where do we find them? Second most fantasy points to the tight end spot, as you see on the left side of your screen. A great matchup there. In terms of Andrews, since I've already done the research, I'll give you a little bit more to back that up. In the first game that these two teams played this year, Baltimore-Cleveland, Andrews, 58 yards, 5 catches, 2 touchdowns. That was 22.8 fantasy points. That was in week 1. And Cleveland has allowed 12 more fantasy points to 6 different tight ends this year, giving up 5 touchdowns to tight ends in the last 4 games. I like Andrews as the pick there between those two players. All right, sliding over to the running backs. We're looking at Kareem Hunt, Josh Jacobs, J.K. Dobbins. Let's take a look at the matchups. Kareem Hunt, let's see here. Baltimore allowing where do we find them? 25th to the running back spot. So that is the 8th fewest fantasy points to running backs. Not a great matchup. Kareem Hunt, although I've liked his matchup in past weeks, hasn't had the games to back it up, hasn't had the production in terms of fantasy to back it up since then. So I'm hesitant on him. Jacobs, we talked about that matchup. Home against Indianapolis. I'm not afraid of the Colts defense nearly as much as earlier in the year. So you see there in 20th, that's still the 13th fewest fantasy points to the running back spot, but that number has been climbing. They were much lower, and they've been climbing the past few weeks. So I'm not afraid of that matchup as much. Jacobs, obviously, if he's healthy, has the edge in terms of volume. And then you got Dobbins in that game, Baltimore-Cleveland game. Cleveland allowing let's see where we find them on our list, 24th. So they are 9th fewest fantasy points to the running back spot. Again, Dobbins seems to be the guy that's had the edge in terms of the 3 backs there in Baltimore. However, I think that if I can play Jacobs confidently, without being concerned with injury, Jacobs is the pick here. Keep an eye on your reports. Obviously, that game is not till 4 o'clock. Makes it a little bit tougher. Dobbins, the deal is that you have Dobbins as a backup in that Monday night game. So if you attempt to go with Jacobs and it doesn't work out, they rule him out for some reason, you've got somewhere to go. I don't feel like Hunt is a huge edge over Dobbins. I feel like they're probably pretty close to each other for this game in terms of how much you like him. So if Jacobs is your guy that you try to go with and then you find out that he can't go, then, I don't think you're losing a whole lot in going to Dobbins. It's not like he's been playing poorly. I would try to go with, I would personally, if it was me, try to go with Jacobs here because he's the guy. You got to trust that if they say the guy's healthy at this point. We saw this with Julio Jones last week. We said, trust him if he says he's healthy, trust him. And obviously he's out this week. So keep an eye on your reports. Andrews for sure. And then Jacobs is the guy I would think there. And then you've got Dobbins as a potential backup if you have to go that way. So again, I hope whichever guys you pick there, I hope they crush it. And thank you again, KLS Talks, for the question. I do see another one here. And you've got Taysom Hill or Matt Ryan, 6 points per passing touchdown. Well, I will say this. Matt Ryan's got a very nice matchup this week. I'm just, at this point, we've seen some stinkers from Matt Ryan. And so it makes you really hesitant in terms of playing him. Let's take a look at the matchup. Let's take a look for what time that game is at. So Atlanta, that's a 4:25 game on the road against the Chargers. The matchup is not a bad matchup at all. 6th most fantasy points to the quarterback spot. I don't have Matt Ryan as one of my top 5 starts, but I did put him down in terms of the guy that I looked into making that choice. So I did look up a little bit more of the information to back that up. So the Chargers have given up 20-plus fantasy points to 5 quarterbacks this year. They're actually allowing the 5th fewest passing yards in the league. That's one of those situations where when you're looking at low passing yards allowed, but a high fantasy point number, that just tells you there's a lot of touchdowns in play. Ryan has only been over 20 fantasy points in 1 of his last 6 games. And over the course of those games, he's had 7 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. I can't tell you off the top of my head all those matchups, but I don't feel like necessarily all those were just bad matchups. I'm hesitant on Matt Ryan at this point. Certainly has the ability to play well, but we have not seen him play well, and Julio Jones hasn't been there, and Julio is out for this game. Taysom Hill, I have liked Taysom Hill since he's been in the lineup for New Orleans. The matchup on the road against Philadelphia, 4:25 start. And Philadelphia, let's see where they are on our list, 23rd. So they are the 10th fewest fantasy points to the quarterback spot. So clearly the matchup edge is there for Matt Ryan. However, if you flip that to running backs, Philadelphia, let's see here, 22nd. So if we're talking about Taysom Hill in terms of adding to that on the ground, the matchup doesn't say that it's great. Nonetheless, I will put back up the quarterback spots, matchups rather. The edge is clearly to Matt Ryan in this matchup, so I'm not going to just gloss over him being as a choice here. Personally, I like Taysom Hill. I think it's a much safer floor. Ryan has put up bad games, and we've seen him struggle even more when Julio hasn't been in the lineup. So because of Taysom Hill's, I know it's 6 points per passing touchdown, and Taysom hasn't necessarily been getting it done through the air. But I do think his floor is safer because of the run game to back it up. And like I said, Ryan has struggled without Julio. To me, it's Hill between these two. But again, I try to put up the information so that, you have something to back that up. And like I said, the matchup is there for Ryan. So if you decided to go that way, I certainly can't fault you for that. For me, my gut says Hill in this one. But again, I hope whichever guy you pick, I do hope that they absolutely crush it. Let me see if there are any follow-ups here from you before I move on. And yes, I do see one follow-up, so I'll hit that one next. How about Gurley? Would you start Gurley over Jacobs, Dobbins, and Hunt in a PPR? I will say that I think that I have to like Gurley tomorrow because the matchup is there. So if I put up the running back matchup here, Todd Gurley, they are playing, let me look at the time again. I always like to go back to that. 4:25 on the road, Chargers, indoor game, no weather issues. Chargers, the 10th most fantasy points to the running back spot. My concern with Gurley is he fully healthy? What do we know about that? I want to say he's still, I'm going to look it up. I want to say he's still listed as questionable. So I don't think that you're necessarily in a better spot in terms of the injury concerns than you are with Jacobs there. But again, it's also a 4:25 game. So you've got some flexibility there. He's not listed as questionable. Says he's not in the team's final injury report. Will play in week 14, although did have limited practices late in the week. Gurley's health is always a concern at this point. So that's, he's had a very nice year. It's just the fact that he's been dealing with that injury the past few weeks, a couple of down games as a result. I don't not like Gurley here. I probably do like Gurley over Dobbins and Hunt. I don't like Gurley over Jacobs if Jacobs is healthy. So I guess that would be where I would stand on this one if I had to put them in order. I'd still want to take Jacobs first. But I think that Gurley is another potential guy so essentially your situation is, as you watch these games tomorrow, if you pass Hunt in that 1:00 game, you've got other options to go with there. And I would have to feel that Hunt had a clear advantage over those other guys, or I would have to feel completely that Josh Jacobs is hurt to not go in there. I think Josh Jacobs is the guy you trust most because he is probably the most talented player out of all these guys at this point. And I always say the 4 things I talk about are ability, volume, matchup, and game script. So purely ability, Jacobs the most upside. You trust him there. It's just a matter of, keep an eye on your reports. And if you feel confident going with Jacobs, then I would say go with him. But you've got guys to back it up. So at least you're protected in the potential that he can't go. Again, hope whoever we pick crushes it. But absolutely thank you for the chat. And thank you for the follow-ups. And I think I got everything that you got here. But as I always say, if I ever miss anything, guys, please let me know. And I will try to make sure that I don't miss anybody's chats. All right, next one here from Lucius Farinas 44. Glad to have you back, Lucius, a regular on our live streams. You say, great to see you on live again. One last week, so I appreciate your advice. Awesome. Mind helping my lineup again? Not at all. That's what we're here for. That's what we love to do. Glad that you got the W. Let's take a look at what you got. All right, you say 1 quarterback, 2 running back, 2 wide receiver, 1 flex. Brady Lamar, Godwin, Thielen, Metcalf, Taylor, Henry, Kamara. I still don't have a kicker, and my opponent had Koo. Waivers are wide open for me on kickers. Thanks in advance. I can't say that I've necessarily put the research into kickers at this point. However, I know that I've been going with Jason Sanders from Miami as a streamer lately. I can't say for sure what his matchup is. I don't have that up in front of me. But in terms of the game playing against Kansas City, you would expect game in Miami, no weather issues. and also potentially a high-scoring game, because Kansas City is a high-scoring team, and they'll have to try to keep up. Off the top of my head, that's just a quick name off the top of my head, but clearly there are a lot of other options out there that can help you out. All right, so let's go ahead and start through the rest of this, and we will start, since you asked quarterback first, we'll put up the quarterbacks, and you are choosing between Brady and Lamar. All right, so I like Tom Brady a lot this week. That is a 1 p.m. game against Minnesota. Minnesota has been bleeding yards through the air this year. As you look at the matchup there, where are they? 18th in terms of fantasy points to quarterbacks. I find that a little lower than I would have expected, since to wide receivers they are second. So I like this matchup for Brady and the Bucks. Flipping that over to the Baltimore side, Cleveland, let's see where they fall on this list. Cleveland, the 8th most fantasy points to the quarterback spot. So a good matchup here for Cleveland. We saw Lamar Jackson have a good game last week. Talent-wise and where you drafted him wise, Jackson's your guy. I usually will lean towards that in this type of a situation. Because you got to, if you put the trust in the guy to draft him that high to start the year, then you kind of got to put that trust in that guy as the season goes forward, unless you see a reason not to. Although I do think Brady is going to have a nice game this week, I think Jackson is still your guy there. So this is probably closer, but I probably think that Jackson is still a very reasonable start between those two. All right, moving on next to the wide receiver spot. Let's see, Godwin, Thielen, Metcalf. I'll start in the order that you presented them. So Godwin for Tampa Bay against Minnesota. Again, a great matchup. Second most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. Perhaps if Godwin is the guy you choose as one of your players here, an argument to be made in terms of Brady and taking that stack there. But let's take a look at the other guys. Minnesota, Thielen against Tampa Bay. I like this matchup as well. 9th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. And then DK Metcalf against the New York Jets. That's a home game, 4 o'clock. The Jets, the matchup is in 10th. I just feel like DK Metcalf is going to have a huge game tomorrow. I just have that feeling. The Jets can't stop anybody, and I think they're going to run it up with him. So I think here Metcalf is probably my first pick out of these three. I think Godwin and Thielen is a coin flip there for you. I like Godwin. I like Thielen. I think if you go Thielen, let's put it this way. If this is a coin flip and you play Lamar, then I think Thielen makes sense to play there. I think if you decide to play Brady, it makes sense to play Godwin because it gives you the stack. I probably lean towards Thielen in this situation. I think Tampa Bay, now the situation with Dalvin Cook, so if you look at Tampa Bay against the run game, they are much lower, 29th, the 4th fewest fantasy points to running backs. So that kind of leads you to believe that perhaps they aren't able to just lean on Dalvin Cook as much, and they have to throw it more. That brings Adam Thielen and also Justin Jefferson into play. I like them both. I'm going to pick those two, but again, as I say, always go with your gut on these. Let me go back to the running backs now, and let's take a look at the guys that you've got listed here. You've got Taylor, Henry, and Kamara. I think it's awful tough. Let's go in order. So start with Indianapolis. Taylor against Las Vegas, a great matchup, 4th most fantasy points to the running back spot. Derrick Henry for this is the pick for the first, hands down. Jacksonville, not good against the run, 5th most fantasy points to running backs. If anything in this matchup, I expect them to lean on this run game and probably have the lead. So game script says Henry is all over it in this game. Alvin Kamara, this is probably more of the question mark. New Orleans, 425 against Philadelphia. The matchup, Philadelphia, 22nd. That's the 11th fewest fantasy points to the running back spot. We've seen, obviously, we talked about this a little bit earlier with Taysom Hill, a little bit more of a question mark with Kamara. He's been better. If you take that Denver game out of play, you trust him a little bit more. And although he did cede some work to Latavius Murray, I want to say that was more so in that Denver game. So I don't necessarily think that, it's not Drew Brees back there, and he's had bigger games with Brees. He also had bigger games when Michael Thomas wasn't playing. But again, Alvin Kamara is the guy you took as your first-round draft pick in your league, most likely. He's, when I look at those four components, in terms of ability, volume, matchup, game script, he's one of the best in the league. I don't know how you can sit Kamara there. I definitely can't sit Henry there. So those are my two picks for running back. That brings us to the flex decision here. And so based on what I've said, that tells you that the flex is between Godwin and Taylor. So kind of going back to that Taylor matchup, Las Vegas, 4th most fantasy points to running backs. Probably I want to say a safer floor, although obviously you've got other guys in the mix there at running back for the Colts that could potentially take some work away. But we saw Taylor have a really nice game last week. We've seen him had some down games prior to that. I still feel like he has the talent to trust him here. My gut says Taylor in this situation. Again, I don't know if this is a standard league or a PPR league. Perhaps if it's a PPR league, that might sway your decision towards Godwin. In a standard or a half-point PPR, my gut says Taylor on this one. He had such a great game last week, and the matchup is there again this week. Not the matchup isn't there for Godwin by any means, but a lot of times I feel like if you can play 3 running backs in these sorts of spots, a lot of times I feel like you're better off going that way because it's usually production. There's more you can count on just a little bit more than going with a receiver. There's other question marks that can happen there. So I'm going to say Taylor here, but I am going to say go with your gut. If you do feel if you like Godwin better, I certainly don't fault you for that at all. But I think that's my flex pick that I would pick here. And then as far as the kicker, yeah, wide open. I would say go ahead and just take a look at what's there and order them by projected points. Take a stab and see what you have. I know don't take Michael Badgley. That's just pure bias. I picked him up earlier in the year and I left him in my lineup and he put up a stinker for me. But yeah, that's pretty much up in the air. I think that you can probably find a lot of good choices there. I'm looking to see if there are any follow-ups here from you. I don't see any. So again, Lucius Varinas 44, one of our regulars here on the stream. Thank you for being here. Glad to have you back with us again tonight. And hopefully, as I always say, I hope whoever you pick, I hope they crush it. All right, we'll move on to the next one. And this next chat is coming in from C Kill. C Kill looks like he might be a new viewer to the live stream. So welcome. Glad to have you with us tonight. You say Robbie Anderson projection this week. Could be a huge week without DJ Moore there. Also liked and sub. Thank you so much, C Kill, for doing that. Appreciate it as we continue to grow. Glad to have all you guys on board. And yes, I like Robbie Anderson quite a bit this week. And I agree with you. The volume should get a little bit of a boost there. If you take a look at the matchup here, let's take a look at home against Denver. That is a 1 p.m. game. Denver, where are they? Currently allowing, let's see, they're 26th, so they're in the red. So that's the 7th fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. However, again, no Christian McCaffrey this game. Certainly Mike Davis has been good, but certainly I think that still leaves Robbie Anderson in play. I'm sure Curtis Samuel will get some work there. But Anderson has certainly had a very nice year. Let me call up his stats. Let's take a look just so I can give you a little bit more backup on what he's been doing in terms of targets. Robbie Anderson. Let's see here. Too many Andersons in the league. There we go. All right. So in recent games here, Robbie Anderson for Carolina. So they're coming off a bye. In week 12, it was against Minnesota. This is a half-point screen I'm looking on. 7 targets, 4 catches, 94 yards and a touchdown, 17.4 fantasy points in a half point. So if you're playing in full PPR, you tack on another 2, that would have been 19.4. A couple games before that, not as high, but the targets have reasonably been there. The last 4 games, targets in order 13, 6, 9, and 7. So he's been seeing the volume. Certainly you would expect that to at least continue, if not get a little bit of a bump this week. So yeah, I don't dislike Robbie Anderson at all this week. I think it's a fine start. Obviously, the matchup is a little bit lower, but sometimes that happens. And when we've got a player who's been producing throughout the season, you have to hope that he's able to overcome that matchup. And I certainly think that with the difference in volume there and the potential there for him this week, I think he's definitely able to do that. So yeah, I do like Robbie Anderson. And I think it's a fine start for your fantasy team. Again, C Kill, thank you for being with the stream. Looks like you're a new viewer, so glad that you found us, and we would love to have you on future streams and talk fantasy football with us in the future as well. So thank you for the chat. All right, Vansco. Oh, here we go, Vansco. Sitting Gesicki for Rudolph was a hard one to stomach. I was watching this one. First of all, thanks for being back on the stream, and thank you for jumping in the chat again. Yeah, nothing worse than the goose egg. That was a rough one. However, I will say this, hopefully that you were still able to get that win. And I don't necessarily think this is why a lot of times I say that fantasy football is a lot like poker, because sometimes, you put all this information through and try to make the best decision you can, and the cards don't fall your way. you did have a lot of Dolphins going, and you had a nice game from Gesicki. The Dolphins D, I think, did well for you, and I think Sanders had a nice game kicking as well. So hopefully that was enough to pull you through. And let's see if your next chat does talk about that. You say, but I managed to secure my first-round bye despite the mistake. Awesome. Glad to hear that. And trust me, I was thinking about that and hoping that worked out for you despite that. Sitting Gibson for Gaskin was a winner. Now they're both possibly done for the season. Yes, that sucks. Well, let me see. Here's your next follow-up. I should have went against my gut and kept the Dolphin stack, but my gut was right about starting Herbert. Yes, and I got crushed by that, by Herbert against Belichick. You were absolutely right on that one, and I was kicking myself as well for not putting a little bit extra thought and taking a look at the fact that the week before that the Patriots also handed a tough game to Kyler Murray. And a little bit more thought on my part, I could potentially see where I might have made some other decisions as well and tried to stream somebody else at quarterback, because I did lose out in one spot where I was in a must-win situation to get to my playoffs. I've had Justin Herbert running in a bunch of spots this year since he came on, and I just trusted that he's been playing well, that he would keep playing well, and that happened. So, yeah, that was unfortunate, and it hurt me as well. But at any rate, glad that you were able to still get that bye. And let's continue on with what you got here. I do have a few playoff decisions this week that I'd like to consult you on. Glad to help out. That's what we're here for. I wish my camera would be more in focus, but there's nothing I can do with that at this point. All right, now that Gaskin and DJ are both on the COVID list, I have to decide between Gallman, CEH, Gio Bernard, and DeAndre Washington for my RB2. Let me see any follow-ups that pertain to this question. I don't see any here, so let's see if I can answer that with the help of our matchups. I will say before I even start looking at the matchups, at this point, Wayne Gallman has been so solid all year long. Perhaps he hasn't been somebody that you needed to play because you've had other players in those spots. But when you look at his numbers, the production has been there. This week playing at home against the Arizona Giants. Arizona, the 14th most fantasy points to the running back spot. Before I even look at anybody else, I'm going to call up Gallman's numbers because I do want to back that up with actual information instead of me just giving you opinions. So if you take a look at Wayne Gallman, in the past 6 games, he's had a touchdown in 5 of those 6 games, 6 touchdowns overall. He did have 1 2-touchdown game. He did not have a touchdown last week against Seattle. However, he did have 135 yards rushing. That was 13.5 fantasy points, so there must not have been any work in terms of pass catching. But I'm looking on a half-point PPR screen, and none of these are under double digits. 13-9, 12-7, 14-2, 18-5, 16-6, and 13-5 right in a run. Again, that's a half-point PPR screen. That is a nice run of solid production to back up this decision. I think it's going to be hard-pressed to not pick him as the person you take here. If this was a really bad matchup, it might be different, but 14th against the run, not the worst by any means. But we will compare that to the other games, and a good comparison here is Gio Bernard because his matchup is much better, except his production has not been there. The matchup against Dallas, I'd say it's a home game, 1 p.m. 6th most fantasy points to the running back spot if Dallas is giving up. The matchup is much better there. We haven't seen the production, so to me, more difficult to trust. Let's take a look at CEH. I do want to look at his numbers after looking at his matchup, but against Miami, this is a road game, 1 p.m. Don't expect to see any weather issues there. Miami giving up. Let's see where they fall on our list here. 21st, so they're in the bottom half in terms of fantasy points to the running back spot. So, the matchup there, DeAndre Washington is the last one. Kansas City has given up production to the run, 13th. I don't know that I necessarily completely trust Washington. Certainly, if he gets the volume, there is opportunity there. But a situation like what we saw last week with Devontae Booker, where you expect him to get the workload and have a great day, and it didn't happen, that always makes you hesitant when you're talking about a player who you expect to get the ball glue, but because you haven't seen it yet, do we know for sure? Let me look up Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Try to say it correctly here. Hopefully he comes up. Of course, I can never get the names. There he is. All right, so I want to check on his production in past weeks because I know it's been a little bit up and down. And I don't think that necessarily has to do with Le'Veon Bell. I just think that has to do with whether Kansas City decides they want to throw it or run it on a particular week. 0 points against Denver. Was there an injury concern? Oh, that's right. Edwards-Helaire was out last week with that illness. I forgot about that. Yep. So and they did everybody huge favors by saying he was going to be active and then sitting him down. So I'm looking at the reports on Thursday, practicing in full, says he's good to go. Yeah, certainly his talent is there. Week 12 against Tampa Bay, 11 rushes, 37 yards, 4.4 fantasy points. There's one of the down games. The game before that against Las Vegas, a better matchup, 14 attempts, 69 yards, 2 touchdowns, 20.20 fantasy points. So we've seen him play well when the matchups are there. Miami is not. They're kind of a middling matchup. Perhaps that's a game where Kansas City decides to throw the ball. I don't know. You think they would be winning that game and games would be in your favor. You drafted him high, so you trust him, but at the same time, Wayne Gallman's production has been there. I think it's between those two guys to me to pick one of those two. This might be a gut play for you on which one you trust more. Do you trust the talent in Clyde Edwards-Helaire that you've seen and the reason why you drafted him that high? Or do you go with the guy that you picked up off the waiver wire, throughout the season? Gallman's been very good. I don't think you're wrong. Hey, my camera's back in focus. Outstanding. I don't think you're wrong to go with Gallman here. I also wouldn't fault you to trust CEH because he's the guy. He's been one of your main guys all year long. That being said, if it were me, I might go Gallman here because he's been that good. He does have the matchup advantage. He has had the more consistent production. It is tough to think of sitting a guy that you drafted that high in this situation, but I do think he's a fine start this week. I think this is a gut play for you. I'm just looking back at all the other information to see if there's anything else that helps us out here. The time of the games, it's a 1 p.m. game for the Giants. CEH, it is also a 1 p.m. game. So you kind of got to make that choice first. I think Gallman is a fine start, but I would have to absolutely say go with your gut on that one. And like I always say, I hope whichever guy you pick there, I hope they absolutely crush it. Let me see if there's another one from here. Here, I'll get you yours next. You go, let's see, you're going with full PPR, pick 2, playoffs, Juju, DJ Chark, DeAndre Swift if he plays, CD Lamb, and Pittman Jr. Tough one because there's a lot of question marks. There's question marks all over the board with these guys here. Let's put up the stats on the left side of the screen. Let's do the wide receivers first. I'm picking 2. So the first one is Juju. That is Sunday night on the road against Buffalo. I will say that I've seen some weather concerns for this game. I haven't checked to see if those are still in play. But in terms of the matchup, 23rd, 10th fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. I feel like Juju potentially is safer in this game than someone like a Chase Claypool. I feel like Claypool will likely draw like a Tre'Davious White and get the bulk of their coverage there. That Juju might have a little bit more potentially out of the slot or more short pass game. Pittsburgh, is going to throw it a lot. I don't think that Juju is a terrible choice in this spot. Like I said, I think there's question marks all across the board with these players that you have up here. DJ Chark for Jacksonville. That's home against Tennessee, 1 p.m. game. I said home against Tennessee. If I said Jacksonville, not sure. What time is it already here? It's only 2 o'clock. I'm holding on. I'm hanging in there. Tennessee, 5th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. The matchup is great. Mike Glennon's your quarterback. Don't love it at all. We haven't seen Chark do it yet when they've been going through all their changes there. Not high in him. Very hesitant about DJ Chark. CD Lamb, Dallas, and that is on the road, Cincinnati, a 1 p.m. game. Cincinnati allowing the 14th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. I actually don't hate Cowboys receivers this week against Cincinnati. Here's the reason why. Andy Dalton, this is a lot of times you hear people talk about revenge games and you're like, oh, does that really matter? I kind of feel like this one might be a game where they really kind of want to see Dalton have a nice game playing against his former team. I don't feel like the matchup is one that you hate. I don't feel like it's an awful matchup. And also, I think the concerns with Dalton as a quarterback, I've heard this talked about a lot, is are you looking at primetime Andy Dalton or are you looking at middle of the day Andy Dalton? He seems to struggle in games where the entire country's eyes are on that game. This is a 1 p.m. game. I actually think this game was originally a later game and it got flexed back? I'm not sure. I thought I heard about one of the Dallas games got flexed back to an earlier time. No, this wasn't it. I think it was a different game. Nonetheless, I just feel like this is a reasonably good game for Dalton, and therefore the receivers are going to come along. So I don't hate CeeDee Lamb here in this matchup. Michael Pittman Jr. in Indianapolis against Las Vegas. Las Vegas, the 13th most fantasy points to wide receivers. I don't think that's a bad matchup either. I think that's probably equal to Lamb if you have to look at those two in terms of which one you like better. I don't dislike either one of them. And then let me flip over to the running back side and take a look at DeAndre Swift. So that is a 425 game home against Green Bay. Green Bay, the third most fantasy points to the running back spot. The matchup is there. I'm hesitant about Swift because last week, when I was looking around for information, I did see a soundbite from Darrell Bevell talking about that they would want to kind of work Swift back in slowly. Now, again, that was talking about if he played last week. So I don't know if he's seen enough practice time this week for them to feel more comfortable since he's been out of action for a while. But just simply because of him saying that for last week's game, it makes me feel like there's a reasonable chance that Adrian Peterson sees a little bit more work than he might necessarily see otherwise here. So I will say I'm a little bit hesitant with Swift. I certainly like the talent. If we had already seen him play for a game and he was still just kind of in that questionable stage, but he played once, I might feel more comfortable with him. I'm hesitant on his volume this week. I do think if he plays well because it's a great matchup. So that does change the outlook a little bit. So I guess what I'm getting at in terms of picking two here, I think Juju is a reasonable. Again, I think all these players have question marks. I think Juju is reasonable, and if I had to pick, if I felt that CeeDee Lamb and Pittman were equal, I'd probably pick CeeDee Lamb in this situation. I feel like he's probably had a little bit of the edge in terms of a higher tier player this season between the two. Obviously, his production has been not quite what it was since the quarterback change and that awful injury to Dak Prescott. But I do think that he has still had reasonable production, and I am going to look that up just to back that up because I do want to see if I'm misspeaking and telling you that his production has been good. Let's see here. In terms of targets, yeah, his targets has still been there. I mean, hasn't necessarily had as great a game. He has had a touchdown in 2 of the last 4 games, but none in the last 2 games, if that makes sense. I'm looking on a half-point PPR screen. So if we talk about the last 4 games, he had 7 targets, 6 targets, 7 targets, 9 targets in terms of points, 13, 10, 14, 6, 4, 6, and 7, 6. Obviously, the last 2, Washington and Baltimore, tougher matchups. The previous 2 before that, Pittsburgh and Minnesota, a little bit better matchups in comparison. I do think this is a better matchup this week. I don't think that CeeDee Lamb is a bad pick here. I know there are concerns there, but you also have, I think, equal concerns with Pittman when it comes to the volume that T.Y. Hilton has started to work through in that wide receiver core. So I will say out of these players, again, go with your gut. But I think I would lean Juju and CeeDee Lamb, especially given the fact that it's full PPR. That kind of gives you the edge over Swift, in addition to the fact that you're kind of unsure about Swift's volume. Again, Vansco, whoever you pick, I hope they absolutely crush it. Let me see if there are any other follow-ups here that I want to get in from you. Let me see here. Losing Julio is not fun. Told myself I wouldn't draft him this year. I think that's probably in response to somebody else. We might get to that yet. Had to in one league. Now I have someone win with a bunch of WR2s and 3s. I actually traded for Julio Jones this year, so I feel your pain on that one in one of my leagues. Devontae Adams, Aaron Jones took me to the promised land. I think I haven't, again, gone through all these chats, but I do think this one is pertaining to your question. You say, I think I'm more worried about the decision next week because none of them have great matchups. Might just have to ride Gallman. Yeah, I haven't looked at next week's yet, but I would say that this week you might feel a little bit more confident. I can definitely see what you're going with there. But I think that's all from you, Vansco. Again, appreciate you being with us, one of our regulars. Glad to have you back on the stream. And again, go with your gut. You know how it goes at this point. It's fantasy football. It's all about opinions. That's why I try to put up some other stuff, some other information besides just giving my opinion, because otherwise it's just me saying who I like, and I don't feel like that's enough information to give you guys. I'd rather give you more so that you can make the best decision for your team. But again, I hope whoever you take, I hope that they absolutely crush it. All right, I do see a bunch more. I'm going to try to jump back in order and make sure I don't miss anybody. Again, if I missed anybody, please let me know in the chat. But I do think the next one up is Exploitations. And this looks like a new viewer to the stream. So welcome, Exploitations. Glad to have you. Glad that you were able to find us tonight. And you say Josh Jacobs or Kenyon Drake. Josh Jacobs is expected to play. Yes, I do agree with that. And I certainly have not been high on Kenyon Drake. So if it were not for the injury concern here, this would be Josh Jacobs all day. Let's take a look at the matchup to see if that tells us anything additional about this one. And we'll start with Jacobs. Home game, 4:05 p.m., Indianapolis. The Colts D was good earlier in the year. They had great matchups that helped bump up their stats. They have been climbing this list since then. So you see right now, 20th. Still 13th fewest fantasy points to the running back spot. But they were much farther down that list earlier. They had been on their way up. Their defense does not scare me as much as it did earlier in the season. Taking a look at Kenyon Drake, Arizona. That is a road game. New York Giants, a 1 p.m. start. The Giants, 12th most fantasy points to the running back spot. Again, I don't love Kenyon Drake this year. Also, I will say this. Kenyon Drake has an injury concern this week too. So keep an eye on your reports for Drake. I think it said it was a hip injury, but they did say it was an injury that is a new one that happened during the week. So that certainly is in play. Anytime you have a new injury, less time to get to work through it. That might make this kind of like an even plane in terms of the injury concerns. I definitely would try to play Josh Jacobs here if you can. Unless you hear, now again, the time of these games don't help you because it's a 1 p.m. game for the Giants and it's a 4 p.m. game for Vegas. So that doesn't help at all because obviously if Jacobs is out, then you're stuck. Do I feel that Kenyon Drake is going to get you a good enough game to not take that chance? Probably not. I don't know who else you might have on your roster that you could use as a backup plan, but if you have, I'm going to scroll through your chats just to see if there's anything else here that tells about a possible backup plan. I don't see that here. Always hit me back, even if I'm starting to talk about something else, and I'll go back and refer to that. But yeah, I feel like I kind of want to tell you just, hey, take a chance on Jacobs. And then all of a sudden, you get halfway through that first game, you're sitting Drake and they say Jacobs is out. I mean, that would suck. That's a terrible situation to have. So as long as you have something you can fall back on in terms of a worst case scenario, then more confidence in sticking with Jacobs here. I certainly would make every attempt to play Josh Jacobs. I think, especially if they're both partly hurt, clearly to me, the production that has been there for Jacobs this year, I'd much rather go with him. And again, there's a little bit of a bias because Kenyon Drake is somebody that I drafted high in a couple of spots this year, and it's been frustrating. So I definitely like Josh Jacobs here. Again, try to back that up with some information. So at the end of the day, go with your gut. But absolutely, I think Jacobs is a fine start if he's healthy. And again, I hope whichever guy you pick, I hope they crush it. And I do see a further one down here that says that I subbed and liked the stream. I'll try to be active on your streams. I appreciate it so much, Exploitations. And yeah, as we continue to grow, obviously you guys are very important to the growth of this channel. Like I always say, I would rather be talking with you guys than just talking to you. Like I have a lot of content prepared for you for this show. We haven't even gotten to it yet, because we're talking about chats, and that's absolutely fine. This is what we love to do. And so glad to have you guys on board. And thank you again. We do have a goal of 100 new subscribers. We're working our way there, and do appreciate you being a part of that, and look forward to seeing you on future streams. Absolutely. All right. Let's see where we were at next. I'm scrolling up, hoping I'm not missing anybody. I believe next up is, I got the KLS Talks that I see here. So I believe Builder 1K is next up. Builder 1K, welcome back to the stream. Glad to have you, one of our regulars. And you say tonight, Curtis Samuel, Terry McLaurin, Washington, also known as Dolphins running back DeAndre Washington. I'm going to assume this is a pick one. And you say also James Conner. Interesting when you throw that last one into the mix. So let's take a look at some of these matchups to help you out. Wide receivers, Curtis Samuel, Carolina home, 1 p.m. against Denver. Denver currently not a great matchup, 26th, 7th fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. However, No DJ Moore. You expect a little bump there in volume for Curtis Samuel. Helps you out. Terry McLaurin, Washington. On the road, San Francisco, 425. San Francisco, 15th fantasy points to wide receivers. So a better matchup actually than Denver, even though you expect San Francisco as a tougher defense normally. A better matchup there for McLaurin. Take a look at the two running backs that you've talked about. DeAndre Washington for the Dolphins. The Dolphins, 1 p.m. game, home against Kansas City. Kansas City, 13th most fantasy points to the running back spot. And then let me get back into my other deal so I can jump back over here and continue. And you said James Conner also. Conner home, on the road against Buffalo. My Buffalo Bills, 8:20. That's the Sunday night game. Buffalo, the 11th most fantasy points to the running back spot. This one to me, this comes down to McLaurin or Conner. I think that even though Samuel gets the bump in terms of potential volume this week with DJ Moore out, McLaurin gets I always talk about and I always say the four things: ability, volume, matchup, game script. To me, Terry McLaurin is a tier up from Curtis Samuel. I think he's a higher tier player, and I think you trust that. Gives you the more upside here. I don't think the matchup necessarily scares you quite as much. I think McLaurin is a very reasonable choice there. I think Conner is the other choice. I think one of those two is who I'm leaning towards. I certainly think DeAndre Washington could have all of the workload, but it's just as possible that he doesn't. Again, we saw this last week with Devontae Booker, who you would have thought was going to have a great game with Jacobs out and didn't do much of anything. So I would be more hesitant with a guy like that than I would with a guy like James Conner, even though we haven't seen Conner have as many good games. I do think Buffalo has been vulnerable to the run. I think Pittsburgh wants to throw the ball more than they want to run it, but I have to trust the talent just a little with James Conner. So to me, it's between those two. I'm going to see if there's a follow-up, and I do see a follow-up. And you say Mike Davis also. This kind of changes things because I've liked Davis this year. And then so look at this matchup. Carolina home to Denver. Denver, in terms of the running back, 15th most fantasy points to the running back spot. So that puts the matchup equal to Conner, between Davis and Conner. Conner's production has not been great in terms of what you expect from him. Davis has had some good games. My gut, I probably like Davis over Conner between those two. So if that's the case, we're narrowing it down to Davis and Terry McLaurin. Who do you like more in that spot? Me personally, this might be a biased answer because I played Mike Davis quite a bit. I was lucky enough to pick him up on a bunch of waiver wires, even though I didn't draft Christian McCaffrey anywhere. So that did help me out as the season went along. However, I will say Terry McLaurin, I think is a fantastic talent. I think it's probably a toss-up between McLaurin and Mike Davis. I would say probably go with your gut between those two. If it is a standard league, that might give the edge to Davis, although he certainly is able to catch passes out of the backfield as well. If it's a PPR league, possibly that swings you towards McLaurin. I think it's probably that close of a choice. I think either one of them is fine. I might feel that actually, McLaurin might be the pick here. And part of that is because without Antonio Gibson, perhaps Washington is forced to throw it more than they have. And also playing against San Francisco, as you're looking on the left side of the screen, running back stats, San Francisco 26th to the running back spot in terms of fantasy points. So tougher against the run, and you don't have your main guy. You're relying on Peyton Barber and J.D. McKissick. Perhaps that means they're going to work more to their receivers. I'm talking myself into Terry McLaurin in terms of the guy that I would probably go with as a gut over all these guys. So I will say that, but I do think McLaurin, Davis, and I can even include Conner as potentials there are possibilities. Go with your gut, and as I always say, I hope that whoever you pick absolutely crushes it. And I do see that you say, I won my game to make it in the playoffs. Awesome. That's great to hear. That's what we all want. This is the reason why we play this whole year long for fantasy football, to get these playoffs, try to make a run of that championship. So obviously this is when the decisions get tough. So make that one that you feel is the best for what you feel for your team, and hope that guy crushes it. All right. Thank you again, Builder 1K, for being a regular. Thank you for being back. Glad to have you again on the stream. I'm going to hit a couple of here that I haven't hit. I see Vansco says appreciate the help, and I say, no, again, thank you, Vansco, for being here, and we want you guys to do as best as possible. So again, that's why I try to give you some backup information in addition to just my personal thoughts. All right, let me scroll up. I think the next guy in line, I don't want to miss anybody here. I think the next guy in line, again, if I miss anybody, jump in the chat and let me know. I don't want to miss anyone, and I'm not doing it purposely, but I am scrolling up and down through on my streaming service to get this stuff here. I think the next person in line is Rob Navarro. And so, Rob, let me put you up on the screen, and you say, and Rob, I don't recall if you're a new viewer or not. You may be, or you may be a regular. Either way, glad to have you here. You say, CEH, Josh Jacobs, Wayne Gallman, pick 2, standard league. So I think, as we've talked about a little bit tonight, I will put up the matchups here. I think what stands out to me right now, first off, is Wayne Gallman has been very solid. I think he's certainly in the mix for one of these two that I will pick. The matchup, Giants, let's see, where do we find them here? At home, 1 p.m. game, Arizona. Arizona, that you see on the left side of your screen, 14th most fantasy points to the running back spot. A very reasonable matchup there, right at the midway point. Take a look at the other guys. CEH for Kansas City. Road against Miami, 1 p.m. Miami. Where do we find them on the list? 21st. So they are a lower matchup. Edwards, potentially a guy you trust more because you drafted him higher. But Gallman's been great. So I like him. Josh Jacobs. Again, Jacobs in a 4 o'clock game, home against Indianapolis. I know Indianapolis D has been great, but they currently are at 20th, and they were much further down, and they've been running their way up that list. So I'm not as scared of that Colts D as I might have been in the past. To me, if I had to pick 2 here, I probably feel more comfortable with Gallman than CEH, given the fact that CEH has been up and down. That being said, this is one of those situations where you probably have more upside with CEH. So this might come down to a scenario where, do you feel like you want this player to be the safer floor, perhaps keep you in the game, keep you in your matchup, or do you need a bigger game to win against a team that perhaps your opponent is projected for more points than you going into the week, and you would rather go with the upside for CEH? Game time-wise, you got a 1 p.m. game for Kansas City, you got a 4 p.m. game for Vegas, and you got a 1 p.m. game for the Giants. So, yeah, you basically need to make that decision beforehand. Again, the deal is a little bit different here because of the fact that Jacobs, you're going to have to watch his reports. Keep a close eye on that. I could certainly see an argument here to play CEH along with Wayne Gallman and avoid the possible worst-case scenario of Jacobs ending up out for that game. Obviously, you won't know that when the first games start, and if you're picking 2, those other 2 are both playing at 1 o'clock. So I can definitely see that argument. Keep an eye on your reports. If you have some sort of another backup plan that would make you not have to make that decision, that plays into this. But yeah, I'm just looking to see if there are any follow-ups here. If fully healthy, I like Josh Jacobs. And I have to say that between the other 2, Gallman has been solid straight through. 6 touchdowns in the last 6 games. Didn't have one this last game, but had 135 yards rushing. Certainly played well. He's been there. Even though I know he's a guy you picked up off your waiver wire, and potentially you're talking about starting him over CEH, who you probably picked in the 1st or 2nd round, somewhere in that range. But his production's been there. I think both of those are fine starts. To me, it comes down to that injury concern. I think Gallman's one of your 2 guys, and then potentially the other 2 based on what you see from Jacobs. In my opinion, if healthy, if they say he's good to go, you got to trust him. I know things happen sometimes with that. But Jacobs, to me, is the better play if on even par in terms of health-wise. And again, we're not sure if we're going to get that. So you'll have to keep that in the back of your mind. If I'll pick 2 based on full health, and I will say Gallman and Jacobs. But by all means, as I always say, go with your gut. Hopefully I gave you a little bit of backup information to help you make that decision. But you know your roster better than anybody. And again, I hope that whoever you pick, I hope they crush it. And thank you again for the chat, Rob Navarro. And we absolutely look forward to seeing you again. If you like what we're doing here, join us on future streams, and we'll love to talk with you some more. All right, the next chat I have here in the run, and let me say here, it's almost 2:30 on the East Coast. We do have still a bunch of content to get through. We'll probably try to run through these chats, try to sneak our content through, and then potentially call the stream around 3 o'clock tonight so that we can get ready for that Sunday pregame show coming up at 12. Well, this is a good opportunity actually talking about that before I get to this next chat to put up the information for those of you who might be new here. This is our main show, the TFF Live Sunday pregame show. We do that every Sunday. It starts at 12 noon. Same deal as this one. We talk about answering all your fantasy football questions, but we also go through all the actives and actives, start sits, give you player updates, recaps from last week, whole bunch of more information. So for those of you who would like to join us, please, we would love to have you on the stream tomorrow as well. 12 noon is the time right here on our YouTube channel. And again, we thank you for being with us. All right, let's get back to the chat. And I do see that Mike F is next in line. And Mike F, I don't recall if you're a new viewer or not, but if you are, welcome to the stream. If you are back again, welcome back. And you say, with C-Mac out, should I start Kareem Hunt or Gio Bernard? Tough one here. Matchup edges to Gio Bernard between these two. I don't know that necessarily means that's going to be the guy my gut would rely on here. But here's your matchups. So taking a look at Hunt. Cleveland, that's a Monday night game, home against Baltimore. Baltimore, the 25th. That is the 8th fewest fantasy points to the running back spot. Hunt's production has been a little bit down the past few weeks. Nick Chubb has certainly been playing great. We haven't seen as big of games from Kareem Hunt, even though he has had some decent matchups. Gio Bernard for Cincinnati, home against Dallas. Dallas allowing the 6th most fantasy points to the running back spot. You would expect Bernard to get the bulk load of the work there. Cincinnati, obviously, since Joe Burrow went out, has not been the same team. However, you're talking about Hunt possibly splitting with Chubb, even though the talent edge probably goes to Bernard. The volume edge, potentially, he's at least close. You know, I know that Cincinnati has had to abandon the run a lot because they've fallen behind in these games. However, against Dallas, we've seen them be pretty bad this year against the run. And so you have to think there's a reasonable chance that even if Bernard falls into the end zone, you know, that touchdowns helps you towards a decent day. My gut says between these two, it's Gio Bernard. I don't think that you're wrong to pick Hunt because of the fact that Bernard's production hasn't been quite as good. But I see a follow-up here. I also have Chase Edmonds, which does change things a little bit. However, the time of that game, let me see. Arizona Giants, that's a 1 p.m. game. I will say this. The good news is, and your other follow-up here says, my opponent has good matchups and is projected to win when I'm without C-Mac. Here's the deal. This is the wild card in this one. Because of the fact that Kenyon Drake popped up with an injury midweek, it's probably more likely that he potentially doesn't play. And the good news is that's a 1 p.m. game. The matchup against the Giants, that's 12th most fantasy points to the running back spot. Kyler Murray in past weeks has not seemed to – the deal with Drake this year is that Murray has been so good on the ground, he's stolen a lot of the work, in my opinion, from Kenyon Drake. However, once he got a little banged up with that shoulder injury, I feel like they've been leaning on their running backs a little bit more. I do think that means that if Kenyon Drake doesn't play, that Chase Edmonds potentially could be your pick here. I might trust Chase Edmonds over Gio Bernard. The matchup is better for Bernard, but the production hasn't been there for him. Makes it a lot tougher to go with him. If Drake plays, I don't think I start Chase Edmonds over Hunt or Bernard, either of them. My gut would have to go with Bernard at this point simply because of that matchup. And it's kind of like a swing for the fences type deal, especially what you're saying. Your opponent has good matchups. You need a bigger game. You probably have a better chance for a big game against Dallas. We've seen a lot of players. Antonio Gibson crushed them, you know, and it's not like he hasn't, you know, a lot of their work for Washington was going to McKissick still, and we saw him crush them. We don't even see that potential with Bernard. We expect him to have the volume. So yeah, if you have a matchup where your opponent is favored, swinging for the fences, Gio Bernard, you know, the matchup is the fences. So if he has the best matchup, the potential to have the best game, despite the fact that it's Cincinnati, my gut says Bernard here. Again, you know your roster as well as anybody, so that's why I try to give you information to back up my opinion. I don't want you to just go on my opinion alone. And I hope that whichever guy you choose absolutely crushes it. But I think to me, I think Gio Bernard, I'm obviously hesitant as anybody would be because he hasn't been great, but I'm leaning hesitantly towards Gio Bernard. Hope that helps. And again, thank you for being here, Mike F. If you are new to the stream, glad you found us. If I'm losing my mind and you've been here before, then glad to have you back. But again, as you guys continue to sub and add more viewers to the stream, I'll do my best to keep up with which one of you guys are regulars and which one of you guys are new. My gut says that you're a new viewer, Mike F. But if I'm wrong, I do apologize if you've been here before. But glad to have you here, and thank you for the chat. Let me clean up a couple of these down at the bottom. Let's see here. I'll make sure I didn't miss anybody up above. I think I got all of those. Couple here from Christopher Walker. Christopher Walker says, new to the show. Love the content so far. Appreciate that, Christopher Walker. Glad that you found us tonight. And you say, who would you choose between J.D. McKissic or Mike Davis if Christian McCaffrey does not play? I do think it's doubtful that Christian McCaffrey plays in this game. I feel a lot more solidly about Mike Davis. In terms of the game times, it's a 1 p.m. game, so you're going to know the answer to that pretty early. He's listed as doubtful right now. I don't think he's going to play. I would take him over McKissic in this spot. San Francisco, I will put this information up to back up my opinion. So here are fantasy points to the running back spot. So if we go to that Carolina matchup, Denver, a little bit tougher matchup, 15th, right in the midway point in terms of fantasy points to running backs. However, McKissic for Washington, San Francisco, 26th, the 7th fewest fantasy points to the running back spot. In addition, we know that McKissic potentially is going to lose some work to Peyton Barber. I do feel that with Gibson out, I don't think it's going to be McKissic backfield to himself. I think Peyton Barber is going to get a lot of the rush work. I think you're going to continue to see McKissic as a change of pace back, pass catcher out of the backfield. I don't think they're going to try to run him for the bulk of the carries. That makes you definitely lean towards Davis here, because with CMC out, Davis is the guy. We've seen him have some nice games, and he has a potentially better matchup there with Denver 15th versus San Francisco at 26th. So I do like Davis of those two. Again, keep an eye on reports. Make sure that there's nothing funny that happens and something doesn't change with McCaffrey, but I don't expect him to play. My gut says that I like Davis in that spot. But again, go with your gut, and absolutely, if you whichever guy you pick, I hope that they crush it. All right, let me get I see one here. K. Ellis Talk says, you skipped me, man. You skipped my man. And I'm going to get to this one first because I think I missed you on a previous stream too, K. Ellis Talk. So I don't want to do that again. Let me scroll back up and help me out. Tell me about how high. I see one from you about Gurley over Jacobs, Dobbins, and Hunt. I think we got to that one. So if I'm missing one from earlier than that, please jump in the chat and tell me. But the next one here I see from you, if Jacobs is out, do I start Booker over Hunt, Gurley, Dobbins, PPR? Let me know if that's the one that you're talking about. I don't recall getting to this one yet. So let's take a look. Let's take a look at the matchups. I will say this. I'm hesitant on Devontae Booker because of what happened last week at this point. So I would be hard-pressed to pick him over some of the other guys. Again, that is a 4 p.m. game. So that Hunt situation, you would have to make that choice sooner, right? No, I'm sorry. Cleveland's a Monday night game. Which one of these guys plays early? None of these guys play early. Okay, so this is a situation where you can wait on this choice, right? Atlanta is, I don't think that – I can't say I like Booker over a guy like Todd Gurley in this situation, or a guy like Kareem Hunt, really even over a guy like J.K. Dobbins, because he seems to be the main – even though there is that split, he seems to be the guy that they've leaned towards more than the others. I'm afraid of Devontae Booker at this point because of what happened last week. We just didn't see him get the production. Matchup-wise, is there enough there to carry that day? We thought it was a good matchup against the Jets. Indianapolis 20th in terms of fantasy points to the running back spot. The Jets they saw last week were higher up, I think 16th. Yeah, I think they were even a little higher than that going in. I don't love Booker because of what happened last week. I mean, that hurt. I think it was like 5 points and a half-point PPR. I know I last minute switched him out over Nyheim Hines, and Hines outperformed him. I did the same thing thinking, well, he's going to get all the work. It didn't go well. So I'm very hesitant on Booker. I think that Jacobs, is certainly the talent is there to overcome that matchup, but I can't say that I like Booker over those other guys. I think you're still potentially in that same spot where if Jacobs is out, you got those three to pick from. And I can't say I love Booker. Not saying he couldn't have a good game. Just very afraid of that after what happened last week. I would, if it were me, probably not. Not saying there's not an argument for it. But yes, I see that this is the one that I missed. So good. I'm glad that I got that for you. Yeah, I don't think that I love Booker here. What I'm going to do real quick is just check. I want to check on the stats from Booker last week and see if they mention anything about the split of work. Because I don't know if what happened. I don't know for sure if what happened was just that he didn't play well or if other guys saw other action. Let's see. 16 rushes, 50 yards. Led the Raiders backfield in rushing, lost some snaps on passing downs. Yeah, Jalen Richard and Theo Riddick. The actual points, 50 yards rushing, 5.6 fantasy points. That was in a half-point PPR league. Yeah, I would. If we'd seen something better from that, I might feel differently. But I don't think that we saw enough from him to feel like he has the edge over a guy like a Kareem Hunt or a Todd Gurley. And perhaps you could say it's closer with J.K. Dobbins because I think he's the guy out of those other guys that's perhaps your biggest concern in terms of losing work. But no, I don't think I like Booker over those two guys. But I hope that helps. And absolutely, again, as I always say, whichever guys you go with, I hope that they crush it. And sorry again for missing. I'm trying my best not to miss these chats. So I apologize for missing you, but I do appreciate you letting me know because I absolutely don't want to miss anybody. All right, Mike F., you say appreciate your answer. Thank you, new and now subscribed. I say no. Thank you, Mike F. Absolutely. We're glad you guys are coming on board. Appreciate all the subs. Again, working towards that goal of 100 new subscribers. More importantly, we want to make sure that you guys get notifications when we have new content, just like we did tonight with the Saturday Stars show. All right, I'm going to scroll back up. And let me see if I've missed anybody. Scrolling through. KLS Vansco, Christopher Walker. Let's see. Okay, here's another one from Christopher Walker. I think I missed this one. Or either that or you might be actually next in line. Corey Davis, Deebo Samuel, T.Y. Hilton. Who would you pick out of those this week? I will put up the matchups to help. I will say right away that my gut says Corey Davis. This is a nice matchup for Tennessee on the road against Jacksonville. 1 p.m. game. Jacksonville, the 6th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. Deebo Samuel. Tougher matchup against Washington. 4-25 game. Washington, 31st. Second fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. T.Y. Hilton. Still a decent matchup here against Vegas. 4 o'clock. Vegas 13th to the wide receiver spot. However, at best, I think in terms of volume, that T.Y. Hilton and Corey Davis is a push. I know Corey Davis is the number 2 to A.J. Brown. T.Y. Hilton would have been the guy you expected to be number 1 throughout the season, but we haven't seen his production reflect that all year. Despite the fact that he's played well the last 2 weeks, I certainly think he may very well play well this week as well. However, Corey Davis has been very good this year. He has the matchup edge in terms of Jacksonville being in 6th. And also you have to think that A.J. Brown, last week he struggled with that ankle injury. He was on and off the injury report during the week. Certainly we expect him to play, but is he 100%? And if he's not, does that mean he is potentially in a little bit of a decoy role? And that means an even better spot for Corey Davis. I don't dislike Deebo Samuel either, but I think in this situation, when you compare the matchups, I think Davis has the clear edge there. I think I ride that in this situation. But again, as I say, go with your gut. That's why I try to present some extra information to kind of back up what I'm saying. I think Corey Davis is a fine start here. And by all means, whoever you pick, I hope they crush it. All right. And again, Christopher Walker, thank you for being on the stream. Appreciate. Glad that you found us tonight. Glad to have you new and glad that you were able to be with us. And you say, thanks for your advice. As saying to go with the gut, just subscribe. Thank you. We'll cough like that. Very good. No, definitely appreciate Christopher Walker. All of you guys that are on us, glad to have you on the stream. And I think we have a couple more to get to here before we get to our, we will run through. It's 2:40 on the East Coast. Not a problem. We got a little bit of content to run through. So here's what we're going to do. I will hit these 2 chats. And if I missed any, I don't think I did, let me know. After I do these 2 chats, I'm going to jump over to our content. I will run through that for anybody that's looking for the actual Saturday Stars portion of the show. And then if there are any couple of chats after that, we will hit those to close the night. All right, this one from A. Aladdin. A. Aladdin, I do believe you are a return viewer, so welcome back. If I'm wrong, welcome to the first time, but I do believe you've been here before. And you say Deebo or Duke, flex standard, also Lamar or Tannehill standard. All right, so let's start out with the matchups here. On the wide receiver side for Deebo Samuel, San Francisco 4-25 home to Washington. Not a great matchup. Second fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. We compare that to the running back side, Duke Johnson. Obviously, David Johnson is out for this game, so it's going to be Duke Johnson's backfield. Also not a great matchup. Chicago, that is a 1 p.m. game, a road game for Houston. Chicago now allowing the 23rd. So that's the 10th fewest fantasy points to the running back spot. I do think, if anything, Chicago's defense, I felt all year long that they're tougher to the pass than they are to the run. So that means that sometimes teams have to kind of rely on that run. I think because of the matchup is not an advantage for Deebo. I like Deebo Samuel in that offense, but there is a slight matchup edge to Duke Johnson, who I would expect to get the bulk of the work. And the fact that it's a standard league, you would think gives the edge a little bit to the running back there. So I'm going to say my gut there says Duke Johnson between the two of those. Then you ask on the quarterback side, let's put up those points, Lamar Jackson or Ryan Tannehill. I like Ryan Tannehill's matchup. However, Jackson, Cleveland, that's the Monday night game. Cleveland, two quarterbacks currently allowing, let's see, where do they fall? 8th most fantasy points to the quarterback spot. If you go over and look at Ryan Tannehill's matchup, Jacksonville, certainly it's a good matchup. That's a 1 p.m. road game, and Jacksonville allowing the 4th most fantasy points to the quarterback spot. To me, you're talking about Lamar Jackson, who you drafted to be your main guy the entire year, versus Ryan Tannehill, who certainly has been good in spots, but I think you lean toward, again, I always say you take a look at 4 things here. You take a look at ability, take a look at volume, take a look at game script, take a look at matchup. To me, when I talk about ability, you're talking about Lamar Jackson is a top tier quarterback. Not that Ryan Tannehill hasn't been good, but you expect Jackson to be a notch above. I know it's been a little bit up and down this year, but he did have a good game last week. The matchup is pretty similar. It's not a big difference between the two there. So I think I probably lean on the guy that you've trusted as your big-time draft pick, and that's Lamar Jackson. Certainly Ryan Tannehill, I don't think he's going to not play well. I do like him as one of my starts for tomorrow. I think of those two, I probably lean Lamar Jackson in that spot. And I do think there's one more here, and you say Colts defense or Steelers defense. Now, I don't have a graphic for the defenses to look at, so let me just take a look at these matchups. Indy against Las Vegas in terms of defense, and Pittsburgh defense against Buffalo. My gut, I'm going to try to call these up really quick without actually looking at. My gut says Pittsburgh because I think that they are the tougher defense overall than, even though Indianapolis has been good. I think that they have been a little banged up on the defensive side, and things have not been quite as good as they might have been for most of the season. Buffalo, here's the matchup numbers I'm looking at. Buffalo allowing the 7th fewest fantasy points to DST. Pittsburgh, let's see here. Indianapolis against Las Vegas. Las Vegas allowing the 15th fewest fantasy points to DST. So kind of in the middle. If I looked at it and Las Vegas was way up higher, that might sway me. But I do think that overall Pittsburgh has been the tougher D. I certainly think there's a case to be made that Buffalo has kind of overcome some tough defenses this year. So this is probably a coin flip. Again, this is a 4 p.m. game, Indy, and a Sunday night game, Pittsburgh. Keep an eye on your reports. If Jacobs doesn't play, you potentially might go towards Indy's D in this spot. That might make a big enough difference in what Las Vegas potentially does against you. Otherwise, to me here, I feel like Pittsburgh has been the better defense all year long, more consistent. Indianapolis took advantage of a lot of good matchups, and they haven't had as many good matchups, and their defense has been a little banged up. My gut says Pittsburgh here. I know it's Buffalo, but I think my gut still says Pittsburgh, but I can certainly see an argument either way. But keep an eye on your reports, and potentially that could sway your decision if Jacobs doesn't play in that game. And that might turn that into a potentially a little bit of a lower scoring game. So I would think about that. And I see another follow-up here. He says, also have Jamal Williams. I can stay with Duke above Jamal Williams. I think so, yeah, even though Green Bay against Detroit is a great matchup. Detroit to running backs have certainly been bleeding fantasy points. They are the number one in terms of fantasy points to running backs. But however, the workload, Yeah, I see what you're saying because of the Chicago thing. Again, you probably, in most cases, you're going to take volume over matchup. If there's a clear edge in volume, which Duke Johnson would have a clear edge over Jamal Williams in volume, you probably trust that more than you trust the difference in the matchup. So, yeah, I think I probably lean Duke Johnson still, even against Jamal Williams there. Again, ALN, appreciate you being on the stream. I'm going to take this graphic off the left side of the screen. Again, like I always say, go with your gut, and that's why I try to put up extra information aside from just my opinion. But by all means, as I always say, I hope whoever you pick, I hope they crush it. All right, and let me see. Christopher Walker says, bless you for being up this late on Fantasy Football Playoff Eve. I try to set my lineups ahead of time so that I don't end up with last minute. Obviously, like I said, it's close to 3 a.m, and Sunday pregame show is on at noon. And so we got some work left to go to get ready for that show. It says, you are on the East Coast. Yes, I am in Buffalo. You say I'm watching from California, ride or die 49ers fan. Do you have a favorite team? Bills Mafia up here in Buffalo. So, yeah, apologize for last week. But, this stuff happens sometimes. But, yeah, it's fantasy football and real football are separate. And I try to keep them that way. So, yeah, there's a lot of the stuff that I talk about here. I try not to introduce, any sort of rooting interest into any of that. But yeah, I'm glad to have you guys that are on the West Coast. If there are more of you, glad to have you here. I actually, like I said, this is a brand new channel. And so one of the things that I've been doing this year is kind of like our main show is Sundays at noon, but I've kind of been trying like almost a little bit of trial and error to see what times are successful. And this late night show has been one of the most successful shows that we've had. I was shooting for like an 11 p.m. start. I got a little backed up on some of the other work getting ready for both of these shows. So that's why we started a little later. We started 12:15 East Coast time tonight. But that's okay because I'm a night owl and it's fine by me. I actually think these late night shows have been very productive. And I think moving forward, that's definitely something to take into consideration. Like, I can put out shows and do content, but if you guys aren't here on the chat joining in, then it's just a show with me talking to you guys. So part of a successful channel, in my opinion, is, being on at times that you guys like watching the show. And I've found, even with some of the videos that I've posted throughout the year, I've had some times where I've posted videos later than I wanted on a specific day. And I thought, I wish I wasn't posting this so late because more people would see it if I posted it earlier. And then all of a sudden, like, the views come in much quicker at later hours. And I was like, I wonder, and I think back to my own, because I'm a night owl, and I tend to, get on YouTube if I want to watch stuff more later at night. So I'm thinking to myself, well, why not do some of these shows late? So to do an 11 o'clock show on a Saturday night on the East Coast, if it's better for you viewers, I'm by all means willing to do that. I would rather be on at a time that you guys want to watch than at a time that I'm just putting up content. So yeah, I absolutely don't mind doing this show. Like I said, we'll probably run it up just for a little bit more before we close up shop for the night. But yeah, absolutely glad to have you guys on the stream. I'm going to hit this one next chat here, and after that, I will get to our content. And this one is from Jack Evenson. Jack Evenson, and I'm not sure, you might be a new viewer, it looks like. So if you are new, glad to have you. Appreciate you being on the stream. If you are a return viewer, glad to have you back as well. But I do think you might be new. You say, yo, hi, yo, Jack Evenson, yo, you should, let me start over. You. I got you. Should I start tomorrow, Rodgers or Mahomes? Oh, this is an interesting decision. I absolutely like Aaron Rodgers in this game. Let me take a look at the matchups for you, see if I can help you out. Let's see. Green Bay at Detroit, 4:25 start time on the East Coast. And Detroit, fantasy points to quarterback, they are at 11th. So a very decent matchup there for Aaron Rodgers. On the flip side, Patrick Mahomes, Kansas City at Miami, a 1 p.m. start. Miami is a little bit farther down, 26th in terms of fantasy points to the quarterback spot. That is the 7th fewest. This is a difficult choice to me, and I will say this. I'm not someone who has had Patrick Mahomes at all in any of my fantasy leagues over the past couple of years. And really the reason for that is, like, when I draft, I tend to go with the draft quarterbacks later theory, and I usually don't, even if I take a guy in mid rounds, I usually don't go top rounds with a guy. So I can't say from like a personal gut feeling how I would feel about sitting someone like Patrick Mahomes, who is awesome. I feel like that's a very difficult sit to put him on your bench. That being said, Aaron Rodgers, I'm going to give you some of the notes here because I did research his stuff already because I do have him as one of my top starts tomorrow. Patrick Mahomes, I don't include on a start sit list because to me he's an auto start. But Aaron Rodgers, I actually don't have him in my top 5, but I did research his information to consider him for my top 5. Let's see. So these two teams played once already. They played in week 2. Aaron Rodgers against Detroit, 240 yards, 2 touchdowns. That was 18.7 fantasy points. Obviously, Detroit has been very bad against the run, and you would expect Green Bay to be having the upper hand in terms of game script, taking the lead and potentially running the ball more. So that brings Rodgers down a tick. However, he's been awesome this year. I mean, he's had 22-plus fantasy points now in 7 straight games. Certainly, if this was a different quarterback that you were comparing him to than Patrick Mahomes, it would be a much easier start. I think it's difficult to sit Patrick Mahomes. Again, this is not something that I've had a personal circumstance where I've been in that spot where I've thought about sitting him. I can say that I know that last year in one of my leagues I had Lamar Jackson, and I sat him one week throughout the entire season for Matthew Stafford. And in doing so, I did it because of the matchup, and Stafford outperformed him literally by like just 1 or 2 fantasy points. So was it worth me taking that risk when Lamar Jackson was so good last year? Probably not, looking back. And I have to use that as part of my answer for this. Do you want to risk sitting the guy that you drafted probably in the first round or potentially in the second round in your league? Has Aaron Rodgers been great? Yes. But Patrick Mahomes can drop 5 touchdowns on you on any day. Of course, Rodgers can also. But I do think that I probably have a difficult time sitting Mahomes, even though I do think Rodgers is going to be just fine tomorrow. Bottom line, I think either one of these two guys is going to be fine for you. So I don't think you can really go wrong. Take a look at your opponent. See if you're playing a Devontae Adams in your matchup. That will give you a reason to think, do you want to make sure and protect yourself against a huge gains from Adams that you don't get the points from? That could play into this choice. But yeah, to me, I think it's tough to sit Mahomes any week, but I certainly wouldn't fault you if you decided to go with Rodgers in this one. I think it's a coin flip. If it were me, I probably have a tendency to lean towards playing my best guys in a week in and week out basis. So that's probably what backs my opinion on this one. But as I always say, by all means, go with your gut. You know your roster better than anybody, and I hope whichever guy you pick crushes it. Jack Evenson, thank you for being on the stream, and do appreciate you being with us here tonight. All right, I'm going to clean up a couple of these chats here. Let me get from Christopher Walker. Josh Allen grew up an hour from me, Central Valley, California. Played junior college football in Visalia, California. I actually knew someone from that area. I don't know what COS means. Perhaps I'm missing out on a college I'm not thinking of. He played at Reedley Junior College in Reedley, California. All love for Bills. Hey, glad to have more love for the Bills. We've been kind of on the way up, and this year, Reedley, I see that you say that. Certainly this year has been better, and every week, as we go through these games, I start to think to myself, wow, this is really going well, and a little bit like waiting for what's going to happen next. But yeah, absolutely, it's been a great year for us. And you say we have that Frank Gore connection. I'm not old enough to remember a 49er Super Bowl win, so most Niner fans can relate to Bills fans. Absolutely. Also, I think there's kind of an affinity for Bills Mafia around the country just because we're kind of crazy here. I mean, I guess when you're known for jumping through tables more than anything else for several years, then you kind of have a tendency to have people like you. So, yeah, and I will say that I haven't been to a game in a few years, but I have been to some games in some of those lots where the tailgates happen. I'll mention a friend of mine, Doug Kent, who I've known for a long time, actually is someone who has season tickets there, him and his wife, Chrissy. And they I don't know if they still do, but they used to go there in a trailer, and there's a trailer lot there where they would go to the game. And the trailer lot, the way it works is, you get there the night before, and you could tailgate overnight and be ready for the next game. And he actually invited me to a Monday night game against Cleveland a few years back. It was a brutally bad game. It was like a 6-3 final score. But the awesome thing is, like, they were there like the day before, and this was a Monday night game. So you're talking about like a full overnight tailgate before the next game. I mean, it's just like there's a lot of awesome stuff here. Hopefully, things with all the situations going on in this world right now get going back in the right way so that, we can all get back to doing those things. That's a lot of the fun with this football thing. But at least we have fantasy football that we can keep up with from home and not have to worry about all those other concerns. So, yeah, absolutely. But again, thank you, Christopher Walker, for being on the stream. Jack Evenson, I see you say super tough to sit Mahomes. I agree. That's kind of my thought on the whole thing. And you say, thank you, I like the advice. And I say, no, thank you for being on the stream with us. Again, we'd like to have you guys here. We'd much rather be talking with you than talking to you. All right, I keep saying I'm going to get to my content, and I keep getting more chats, but that's fine by me. So let me put up Daniel Padilla. Thank you for being here, Daniel. Glad to have you on the stream. And you say, hey, man, thanks for being on this late in the night. Not a problem. We'll deal with that. All that other situation, no worries. I'm a night owl. You say, I would like to know your thoughts on Swift's workload tomorrow against Green Bay. Worth the start in a standard point league. Thanks again. Here's the deal. I'm not sold on the workload. I will put up the matchup because we already know that that's great. And again, the game time for that game tomorrow, that is a 4:25 game home against Green Bay. Third most fantasy points to the running back spot. You see that on the left side of your screen. I am hesitant on Swift because last week, I don't have the video clip for this week, but I had a video clip soundbite from Darrell Bevell, the interim head coach for the Lions last week, when they were considering whether or not he would be available for that game. And what he said was that they were concerned with bringing him back with a full workload in that first game back since he's missed so many games. I don't know why that would have changed this week. You know, potentially he got in more practices during the week, but we still continue to see him dealing with that illness. I am worried that they will not be giving him a full workload in this game. Certainly against a team like Green Bay, who is vulnerable to the run, Adrian Peterson should be just fine on the ground. And I think Detroit is in a situation where they are definitely looking forward. So if they're looking forward, for sure, Swift is their guy in the future. But at the same time, you're not going to be stupid and put him in a spot where, you know, he's going to end up furthering an injury or whatever the case may be, or perhaps coming up with a new injury that he didn't have as a result of getting him too much work. I'm hesitant on a full workload for Swift this game. I think that potentially, depending on who else you have, if you feel that you have somebody with equal spot at the running back position, I think it's probably enough of a concern to take that other spot, take that other guy. Now, if your other guys all have terrible matchups, or you're looking at guys who are splitting time, you know, perhaps Baltimore running backs or San Francisco running backs, a situation like that, now it's different. Now you might look at it differently. You might take that chance on Swift because there is upside there and the matchup is great. But I think if you have equal options, I think probably you take one of those other options, given the fact that I do think there's a very reasonable chance that they protect Swift in this game and they don't give him a full run. So again, whichever way you go, as I always say, I hope the guys you pick crush it. And again, Daniel Padilla, we thank you for being on the stream. I'm not sure if you are a new viewer or not, but if you are, glad to have you with us. And if you are not, glad to have you back. All right, Jack Evenson, you say, I checked my matchup. He doesn't have anyone in Green Bay, but he does have Tyreek Hill, so I should probably start Mahomes. Yes, I always like to say that because sometimes these are things like, especially if you play in a lot of leagues, sometimes this little matchup considerations can fall through the cracks because you're just going through all your different leagues and kind of checking off the guys. Okay, this guy's going to play well. I like this guy better. But there are sometimes little clues in these matchups that help you. So, yeah, if you're playing Tyreek Hill and you were to sit Mahomes and Mahomes has a big day, then you've doubled up against yourself because now Hill, there's a good chance, was going to get a lot of that. So, yeah, absolutely, that protects you against that big game from Tyreek Hill. So, yeah, that even backs up the value in starting Mahomes. So, yes, I think there's a lot, and I'm glad that you did check on that. I think there's a lot of reason behind doing that. Very solid thoughts. All right, let me see from Christopher Walker here. I went to Chico State, so I watched many Bills Mafia videos and support pre-gaming and beer drinking of all kind. Absolutely. Well, you should join us on the Sunday pregame show because there's always been plenty of talks on the Sunday pregame show, especially from one of our main viewers, Larry, who likes to always say he's opened up a cold one before the game start on Sunday. Sierra Nevada is the beer of choice. Can't do the Keystones anymore. Hey, by all means, whatever it takes, you know, there's no bias either way on what you're going to go with there. And you say thanks again and good night and good luck all. Absolutely. Thank you, Christopher Walker, for being with us. And Rob Navarro, you say also from Visalia, California. Good stream, man. Thank you, Rob. Glad to have all of you West Coast people online. Christopher Walker, you jumped in with that. Visalia native, 2006 Valley football champion with Mount Whitney High School. Awesome. We got some accomplished people on this stream. Glad to have you guys. All right. One more here from A. Aladdin. Would you pick up DeAndre Washington and start him over Duke? I will say this. I don't know that I'm going to put up the matchups. I'm hesitant on Washington because for the same reasons of what I talked about with Devontae Booker. Like last week, we expected, Jacobs is out. The Jets, they're going to crush him. He's going to run all over him. It didn't happen. Washington, certainly you would expect to potentially have the backfield to himself, but Patrick Laird is another guy there. And I think, check your reports on Washington, I think there's a little bit of an injury issue that he was working to overcome. Now, I'm not saying he's not a full go, but I'm not sure if that impacts him. Miami home against Kansas City. It is a better matchup. Kansas City, 13th most fantasy points to the running back spot. They've been more vulnerable to the run, but I'm not sold that he gets all of the work there. And again, that puts me towards Duke Johnson. Now, this is what I will say. Should you pick up DeAndre Washington, if you have somebody that you can cut on your roster right now, then I absolutely would pick up DeAndre Washington, even if you don't play him. And this is the reason. Like, we're not talking about a beginning of the year decision where you have a potential, like your waiver priority and you don't want to use it. Like, this is either your playoffs or the week before your playoffs where you're winning to get in. Like, at this point, if you can cut a guy that doesn't have value further down your roster, no matter who that is, you pick up a guy like Washington because potentially somebody else out there in your league, whether it be the person you're playing if you're in the playoffs, or if like your playoffs start next week and you're like in a win and get in situation, there are other teams who are also in that same situation as you who may have lost a David Johnson or they may have lost a Myles Gaskin. If you go out there and get Washington, you are effectively blocking somebody from getting potential value tomorrow. So even if you decide not to play him, there is plenty of reason to get that guy on your roster. It's like I said, especially take a look at your matchup. Is there something going on in your matchup where the other side of that might need a guy and might not have looked yet until they look at their matchups before the game starts tomorrow? Yes, I love picking up DeAndre Washington, even if you don't play him. I think there's a ton of value in doing so because it effectively can block other teams from having a great game. Even if you're hesitant and you don't play him, you make sure those points don't go anywhere else. So yes, I love picking up DeAndre Washington for you if you have the ability to do that, and then you can make the decision later on. So I would definitely be behind that sort of a play for you and for your team. Thank you again, A. Appreciate you being on the stream as well. Glad to have you guys all here. And then Jack Evenson, last question for me, laughing out loud. I know it's like the same thing. I said I was going to do the content and then get back to this, but I didn't. Who do I think, AB or Brandon Ayuk for any flex full PPR league? I don't love Antonio Brown because we haven't seen the production yet. I think it's difficult. It makes him a more difficult start, even despite the fact that he has the matchup. Home, 1 p.m. on the East Coast, Minnesota. Minnesota, the second most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. Brandon Ayuk for San Francisco against Washington, 31st. Second fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. This one is a little bit closer because there's such a discrepancy in the matchup. So let me call up these two guys and just look at some stats for both of them. So for Antonio Brown, we haven't seen really a spectacular game out of him. He did have, he's only had 2 games with 8 or more targets in the last, he's only played the last 4 games. In week 11, he had 13 targets. That was against the Rams, 8 catches. Even with those 8 catches, I'm looking at a half-point screen. It was 9.8. So if you tack on the extra 4 points to make it full PPR, that was a 13.8 day fantasy-wise. The game before that, 8 targets, 7 catches, 10.10 and a half point. Tack on 3.5 more, that's 13.6. I mean, those are okay games. It's not like nothing terrible there. But we haven't seen like the big blow-up game. And there certainly are a lot of mouths to feed there for Tampa Bay. So potentially, this could be a game where, because the matchup is so good, he does see that volume that produces a good day for him. Let me look up Brandon Ayuk. I like Brandon Ayuk a lot, and I have all year. Obviously, it has changed a little bit with the return of Deebo Samuel, as I struggle with getting his name up here, and that matchup is not great. But if you look at, let's see, the last couple games. So week 12 against the Rams, I believe he was completely out that game, right? I'm trying to look back to see. I believe he was out in week 12. That wasn't like a goose egg. That was just a didn't play. So in the last two games, in fact, in his last 4 games that he did, again, I'm not seeing, I have to rely off the top of my head if he played the Green Bay game or not. It's a 0. I'm assuming he didn't play. Those other 4 games, his targets were 7, 10, 14, and 9. Again, on a half-point PPR screen, I'm showing 14-5, 19-1, 16-2, and 18 even. His yardage, 115, 91, 75, 95. Touchdown in 3 of the last 4 games, and actually in 4 of the last 5 games. This is a guy who's been very good all year long. I see. The thing is the matchup's not there. Washington is tougher. His workload has been there, and I tend to lean towards volume over matchup. It's just that this is a huge discrepancy in matchup, more so than most. So that probably makes this a coin flip to me. I'm going to look at the game times to see if there's anything that helps. Potentially, can you make this decision later on in the day? It's a 1 p.m. game for Tampa Bay, and it is a 4:25 game for San Francisco. So, yeah, you pretty much need to make this decision ahead of time. I don't think you can argue with the work that Ayuk has gotten. And I think that in terms of, if you put it in terms of who has the safer floor, that probably makes it Ayuk because of the volume. Again, I always talk about 4 things when making these decisions: ability, volume, matchup, and game script, in that order. So that's why I put volume ahead of matchup, because even in a situation like this where the matchup is distinct, to me, the volume, like, we haven't seen it be there consistently for AB, which means there's as good a chance that Mike Evans, that Chris Godwin, that Rob Gronkowski, those guys carry the day for Tampa Bay, and Brown doesn't get his. There's a chance he does get his. But we probably feel better about Ayuk in terms of where he stands in that wide receiver core. To me, that puts Ayuk ahead of AB in this situation, not by much because of the matchups. The matchups make this kind of a coin flip, but my gut says Ayuk just because of the fact that we have not seen it yet from Brown. We have seen it from Ayuk. So I think if I had to lean, like I always say, go with your gut. But that's why I try to back this up with some information instead of just saying who I like. Me personally, I probably lean Ayuk here. But if you go the other way, I can't fault you. So your roster as good as anybody. But as always, I hope whoever you pick, I hope they absolutely crush it. And Daniel Padilla, I'm a new viewer from California. Thank you for the insight. And I say no, thank you for being here, Daniel. And again, the fact that all you guys are from the West Coast that are watching here tonight, I know I talked a little bit about this. Like, it's 10 after 3 in the morning on the East Coast. But, these live streams, if a lot of viewers are liking them with the late night live streams, then by all means, this is a consideration that I take into when I do these. Like I said, this is a brand new channel. So part of what I've done this year is kind of take a look at some of this stuff and, make decisions on when to best do these live streams. So again, let me put up some information, and then next we're going to go into content. I promise I'm going to do the actual content of this show. First, I'll put up a couple of pieces of information for you guys that might be new. This is our main show. It's the TFF Live Sunday pregame show. We're here every Sunday at 12 noon. Same thing as this, answering all your fantasy football questions on chat. But a lot of other information like actives and actives for the 1 p.m. games, starts and sits. We also do player updates from throughout the league, get you some information from some of the coaches, and then also like a little bit of a recap on previous weeks. That's all on our Sunday pregame show. Again, that's every Sunday. It's in less than 10 hours from now. So we'll be getting to that show and getting ready for that show shortly. But by all means, we'd love to have as many of you on with that live stream as would like to join us. And again, this is our rundown of information. The Fantasy Follow, we're a brand new channel. We appreciate all you guys for being here, and we thank you for all the new subs. We are working towards that goal of 100 new subscribers. So obviously we appreciate all of you who are helping us towards that. But more importantly, we want to make sure that you guys get those notifications whenever we have new content. Also, we're on Twitter at the Fantasy Follow, and that's fantasy spelled FNTSY. And you can also send your fantasy football questions during the week to our Twitter account using the hashtag AskTFFLive. And we will answer those questions live on our Sunday pregame show. Facebook/fantasyfollow, our website, thefantasyfollow.com. All right, so let's get to the content of the show. I do see a couple more chats there. I will get to those after we go through the content, and then we will wrap up the show then. But the name of tonight's show is Saturday Stars, and what that means is we give you a rundown of players who have the top matchups for the upcoming games this weekend. And again, this is not a start-sit list. This is not in order of how I expect these players to play or where I feel their value is. This is a rundown of the top matchups to give you an idea of what players are in play for potential big games this weekend. So we start, as always, at the quarterback spot. And the first guy I have on the list here, it's Justin Herbert, quarterback for the LA Chargers. Herbert playing against Atlanta. That game is in Atlanta, and Atlanta is allowing the most fantasy points to the quarterback spot. And some of the information there, Atlanta 20-plus fantasy points to 8 different quarterbacks this year, allowing the 3rd most passing yards in the league. Herbert, now it's been a couple of down weeks. I know that as well as anybody because as somebody who picked up Herbert in a lot of spots, I've kind of been playing him across the board. So that does leave you in that spot where a bad game can mean like losses across the board in all of your leagues. He has only averaged 11.9 fantasy points in the last 2 weeks, only 1 touchdown over that stretch. However, this is a great matchup. I think this is a great get-right spot for Justin Herbert. So absolutely, I have him as a top matchup, a Saturday star for this weekend. Another guy, surprisingly on this list, now like I said, this isn't a start-sit list. I'm not necessarily going to have Sam Darnold as one of my top 5 starts on tomorrow's show or later today's show. However, this is about top matchups and playing at Seattle. The Seahawks allowing the 2nd most fantasy points to the quarterback spot. Obviously, a great matchup. We'll see what Darnold does with this. Seattle, 20-plus fantasy points to 7 different quarterbacks this year, allowing the most passing yards in the league. And a better game this past week for Darnold, 21.04 fantasy points against the Raiders. That was 186 yards, 2 touchdowns, also adding a rushing touchdown. I think it's very viable to put Sam Darnold as a Saturday star top matchup for tomorrow's games. Next guy on our list here is Ryan Tannehill. Ryan Tannehill for the Tennessee Titans, playing at the Jacksonville Jaguars. Jaguars allowing the 4th most fantasy points to the quarterback spot, 22-plus fantasy points to 7 different quarterbacks, giving up the 4th most passing yards in the league. These 2 teams have played once. It was in week 2. Tannehill put up 239 yards passing and 4 touchdowns, 26.76 fantasy points. And he did have 389 yards passing last week with 3 touchdowns. That was 28.56 fantasy points last week versus Cleveland. So the matchup is there. The past performance is there. Ryan Tannehill, a Saturday star, top matchup for week 14. All right, next guy on our list is Matt Ryan, quarterback for the Atlanta Falcons. They are playing the LA Chargers. The Chargers allowing the 6th most fantasy points to the quarterback spot. They have given up 20-plus fantasy points to 5 quarterbacks this year, actually allowing the 5th fewest passing yards in the league. But anytime you see a spread like that where it's the 5th fewest yards and the 6th most points, simply means the touchdowns are there and also potentially that they played some running quarterbacks as well, which certainly that is not Matt Ryan. But Ryan has been struggling, only over 20 fantasy points, 1 of the last 6 games during that stretch, 7 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. A risky start probably because of the past performance, but in terms of the matchup, like I said, Saturday star, top matchup, not necessarily a start sit, but the matchup is there for Matt Ryan. All right, let's move on over to the wide receiver spot. Talking about top matchups here, Saturday stars. I'm starting it out with Mike Williams from the LA Chargers, playing against Atlanta. The Falcons currently allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. Of course, Keenan Allen is in play here too. But as with a start-sit list, I don't include players that I consider auto starts. These are more players that are like possibly fringe players who you might be thinking about playing but not sure about. For sure, you're playing Keenan Allen. I don't know why you wouldn't. But Mike Williams I like here as a top matchup, a Saturday star. Falcons, 19-plus fantasy points to 4 different wide receivers in the last 5 games, giving up the 3rd most passing yards in the league. I think there's enough to go around here for both Keenan, Mike Williams, and potentially Hunter Henry as well. Williams, 13-plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 6 games and 70-plus yards in 3 of his last 6 games. I like this spot for Mike Williams. Yeah, Saturday star, top matchup for this weekend. Next guy on our list, we've talked about him already some tonight, and that is DJ Chark, playing against the Tennessee Titans. Chark, the Titans allowing the 5th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. The matchup is there. I'm concerned with the quarterback play. I'm concerned with the consistency of his production that we've seen. But however, again, this is top matchups, and the matchup is there. 17 plus fantasy points to 4 different wide receivers in the last 2 games, allowing the 5th most passing yards in the league. Gives you a little bit more confidence if you want to play Chark this weekend. He has been under 10 fantasy points 4 of his last 5 games. That's the part of it that I don't like necessarily as much. But the matchup is there, and that makes him a Saturday star for Week 14. Next guy on our list we talked about a lot tonight is Corey Davis. I really like Corey Davis this weekend. Playing against Jacksonville, the Jaguars allowing the 6th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. Again, A.J. Brown, certainly is in the same boat. But again, A.J. Brown, I feel, is, his talent is up there where he's in the auto start range. So I talk about Corey Davis, potentially somebody who might be thinking, should I start him or should I not? Let's see. Taking a look at the matchup here. 14 times they've allowed 15 or more fantasy points this year. That is Jacksonville. And the Jaguars have allowed 100 or more receiving yards to a wide receiver in 8 straight games at this point. And we've seen some big games from Corey Davis. So I certainly think he's in play tomorrow. And again, taking a look at what he's done last week against Cleveland, it was 12 targets, 11 catches, 182 yards, and a touchdown. That was 34.2 fantasy points in a PPR scoring format. I certainly think Corey Davis, a Saturday star, top matchup for this weekend. All right, next guy on our list at the wide receiver spot is Justin Jefferson from the Minnesota Vikings, playing at Tampa Bay. The Bucs currently allowing the 9th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. Jefferson has been great this year, 17 plus fantasy points now in 4 straight games, and he has had 100 plus yards in 2 of those 4 games. And in terms of what the Bucs are allowing, they have given up 19 plus fantasy points to 4 receivers in the last 3 games. And of course, we saw that big 57.9 fantasy points to Tyreek Hill last week. They are allowing the 11th most passing yards in the league. I certainly think, again, Adam Thielen is in play. Same thing here with the auto start. I think Justin Jefferson has been great, and the rookie is in line for another big game this weekend. Certainly a Saturday star, a top matchup for Week 14. All right, we move over to the running back spot next, and we start out with David Montgomery from the Chicago Bears. He has had a great run of games recently. There's been some talk about, the change in play calling. Has that been why the run game has picked up in Chicago? I just think it's been better matchups. Certainly Montgomery has been getting the bulk load of the work there. You would expect that to continue. But his last 2 games, he has averaged 26.2 fantasy points. He's had 3 touchdowns. The matchup this week against Houston. Houston has been bleeding fantasy points to the running back spot. 2nd most fantasy points to running backs. They have given up 15 plus fantasy points 11 times this year, allowing the 2nd most rushing yards in the league. I certainly like David Montgomery again this week as a Saturday star top matchup for Week 14. Next guy on the rundown is Adrian Peterson. We've talked a lot tonight about DeAndre Swift, and again, I kind of gave my thoughts on Swift's workload. That has a lot to do with why I list Adrian Peterson here as the Saturday star from that backfield. Certainly the matchup is good against Green Bay, the 3rd most fantasy points to running backs this year. They have given up 15 plus fantasy points 8 times in the last 10 games, and they are allowing the 5th most rushing yards in the league. Peterson in his last 2 games, 4 touchdowns, 2 in each, and the fantasy points 17.5 and 17.7 in each of those 2 games. So I definitely think that Adrian Peterson is in line for another great game this week. That certainly could change if they decide to play Swift for the bulk load, but I kind of feel like they might err and more on the side of caution when it comes to Swift, and that's why I've got Peterson as a Saturday star top start for Week 14. Another guy in the same sort of situation, potentially splitting time, is Nyheim Hines, running back for the Colts, playing at the Raiders. The Raiders allowing the 4th most fantasy points to the running back spot. They have given up 15 plus fantasy points to 10 different running backs this year, allowing the 14th most rushing yards in the league. Hines, obviously, you're talking about Jonathan Taylor in that backfield, perhaps to a lesser extent Jordan Wilkins, but for sure Taylor, who had a great game last week. But Hines, 3 of his last 6 games, that's had 17 plus fantasy points. Did only have 9 touches last week. I do think the matchup is there. I certainly think the workload could change around. We will see what happens, but I do include Nyheim Hines as a Saturday star top matchup for Week 14, in addition to this guy who has been great all year long, and that is James Robinson from the Jaguars, playing versus the Titans, who are allowing the 7th most fantasy points to the running back spot. We've definitely seen Jacksonville continue to lean on the run as they've gone through kind of their quarterback shuffle there. In terms of the matchup, Tennessee 17 plus fantasy points to 7 different running backs this year, They are giving up the 17th most rushing yards in the league, so they're kind of right in the middle there. Robinson has had 100-plus yards in 2 of his last 4 games. I certainly like this matchup, and that's why I've got James Robinson as a Saturday star top matchup for this weekend, as well as this guy, Melvin Gordon from the Broncos, who has been kind of hit and miss this year, but this is a nice week against the Panthers, who are allowing the 8th most fantasy points to the running back spot. They're giving up 15 or more fantasy points 7 times this year, allowing actually the 15th fewest rushing yards in the league. So that's a little bit of a skew there. But I certainly think Gordon had a great game last week against Kansas City, 131 yards, no touchdowns. That was 15.2 fantasy points. I like this matchup for Gordon here. I've liked a lot of the matchups against the Panthers in terms of running backs this year. So I've got Melvin Gordon as a Saturday star top start for Week 14. All right, that's the running backs. And next we move on to the tight ends. In terms of these last few guys, I've got Mark Andrews. Mark Andrews playing at the Cleveland Browns, who are allowing the 2nd most fantasy points to the tight end position. I think this is a great matchup. 12-plus fantasy points to 6 different tight ends this year Cleveland has allowed, and they had given up 5 touchdowns to tight ends just in the last 4 games. These 2 have played already this year. It was Week 1. Andrews had 58 yards, 5 catches, 2 touchdowns, and that was 22.8 fantasy points. I certainly like Mark Andrews again this week. Again, this isn't the start-sit. I don't necessarily have these guys ranked in order of a start-sit list would be. We're just talking about the top matchups, but you have to figure Mark Andrews is a top player at the tight end spot and a great matchup, so you got to figure he would be involved in a list like that anyway. The next guy I've got here is Dalton Schultz for the Dallas Cowboys, playing at the Cincinnati Bengals, who are currently allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to the tight end spot. They have given up 10 or more fantasy points to 8 different tight ends this year. And in the last 2 weeks combined, it was 217 yards between Evan Ingram and Mike Gesicki. So that's a pretty good combination in the last 2 weeks. Schultz himself has had 4 or more catches now in 5 straight games. Hasn't really done much with them. But again, I talked a little bit about Andy Dalton. I just feel like this is going to be a game where, I mean, certainly Dallas has been trailing in most games, and they've had to throw the ball anyway. But I just feel like they're going to try to get Dalton going as much as possible, playing against his former team in Cincinnati. So that brings along all the targets, and so I feel Dalton Schultz is definitely has some merit to be Saturday star top matchup for Week 14. All right, next guy I've got here, talked about Justin Herbert already. Here's Hunter Henry, the tight end for the Chargers, playing against the Falcons. They are allowing the 5th most fantasy points to the tight end spot. They have given up 10-plus fantasy points to 7 different tight ends this year. Henry himself has had 13 or more fantasy points in 3 of the last 4 games. However, the one that he didn't was last week against New England, where we saw Herbert not have a great game. It was just 1 catch, 1.5 fantasy points for Hunter Henry. Again, this is a nice bounce-back spot. I think there's going to be plenty to go around in this game. So Hunter Henry, I've got him as a Saturday star top matchup for Week 14. And then a guy we've talked about many times this year, and that's Eric Ebron. He's had a very nice run of matchups throughout this course of the season, playing this week against my Buffalo Bills. The Bills currently allowing the 6th most fantasy points to the tight end spot, so they have been vulnerable there. They have given up 11 or more fantasy points to 7 different tight ends this year. Ebron, over his last 2 games, 22 targets, and the fantasy points in those 2 games, 12.4 and 13.8 for the Steelers. You know, I certainly think Pittsburgh is going to throw the ball. That's what they've continued to do all season long. So I definitely think that Eric Ebron remains in play, and he is, again, a Saturday star top matchup for Week 14. All right, that's our run of Saturday stars. We waited a long time. I hope the payoff was good. We got a lot of chats in before that, so that was our run of content, and I do see a couple of new chats, so I'm going to get these before we call it a night here. Let me see what I missed here. Jack Evenson, you say, thanks for the help, my man. Super insightful. And I say, no, thank you. Glad to have you with us. You say, I'm from Chicago. Chicago I've been to a bunch of times, and I've always liked that city a whole bunch. So, yeah, absolutely. Glad to have you on the stream. And you say, I'm a night owl, though. Right there with you. So, yeah, I don't mind these nighttime streams at all. By all means, if you guys, the viewers, like them, then, you know, that's what these are all about. Like, we, as a new channel, you know, as we continue to grow, you know, like I said, we want to do streams when you guys, the viewers, enjoy watching them. And so that's kind of where we're at. And glad that you guys were all part of our stream tonight. That's been it for the Saturday Stars. I will put up our information once again before we call it a night. And we'll remind you that the TFF Live Sunday pregame show is on, right around 9 hours or so from now, a little less than that. We're here every Sunday at 12 noon. Again, same deal as tonight, answering all your fantasy football questions and getting you ready for your matchups each week. And so if you want to join us tomorrow at 12 noon, by all means, we will be here. And we love to have you guys on the streams with us whenever we have them and the rest of our information. We are the Fantasy Follow. We are a brand new channel this year, as I've said before, so we appreciate you being here, and we appreciate all the new subs. We are also on Twitter at the Fantasy Follow, and that is fantasy spelled FNTSY, and you can always send us your fantasy football questions during the week to our Twitter account using the hashtag AskTFFLive, and we will answer those questions on our Sunday pregame show. Facebook/The Fantasy Follow, website thefantasyfollow.com. All right, it's been a good night. A lot of chats. We love talking fantasy football with you guys, so glad to have you guys all on the live stream, and we look forward to seeing you on future live streams. Big day of football tomorrow, Week 14. Fantasy football playoffs starting for most of you. For some of you, if they start in Week 15, you might have that must-win situation to make it in your playoffs. So we want you all to have a great week. We look forward to all the games. So as we always say, good luck in fantasy. We'll see you next time.